Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the stream. It's your host, Dhaiphong. As you can see, the place is looking a little different today. I had to be out of the apartment, clear out my living room for some necessary repairs. Tell me now how I sound, first of all. Am I too loud? I was getting readings that my microphone was really loud when I was preparing for this. It didn't sound too bad. Another thing is if you could tell me about my connection really quickly. I'm getting all kinds of messages from StreamYard saying that my connection is poor. I'm plugged in. Generally, my internet is good. Let me know, is there a lag? Am I speaking? Maybe my mouth is not moving as fast as my words. Some say I'm a touch loud. Let me, some people are saying I'm cloudy. Video is good. Some say it's good, looks good to them. Solid connection. Okay. Well, I'm just going to leave it at that. I sound good. I'm just going to try to not talk as loud. Let me know if I'm talking just good enough. People are saying my voice is loud but clear. I'm just going to turn the microphone down a little bit more then, okay? A little bit more here. Let's see if this makes a difference. All right, everybody. Connection is good. Good. Like the stream, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. It is good to be with you. People are saying that I am all up to speed, literally. It's been a little bit, and as you can see, things look a little bit crazy here. Some say I might be a little bit too close to the mic. Perhaps this microphone has a mind of its own. Sometimes I need to be close to it. Sometimes I don't. All right. Let me know how. All right. So I'm going to continue. People are getting a little impatient with me. All right, everybody. Welcome to the stream. Good evening. Good to be with you. Make sure you like the stream. Make sure you subscribe. If you are new here, I'm less than 8,000 subscribers away from 100,000. So I never thought I would get here on YouTube. All right. 100,000 subscribers. I'm only, 7,400 something away. So that's incredible news. And thank you so much, all of you who have supported this channel and supported this work. So you know what to do. Like the video, like the stream, so you can get more people in here. More people can watch it. Subscribe if you're new here. Hit that notifications bell so you get notified. And of course, this channel does need your support. It is very much appreciated. It helps keep the lights on. It helps when there are emergencies like I had to go through this past week, getting out of this apartment because my ceiling was about to fall on my head. All of these things are very much appreciative of your support, very much needed. And of course, I'm still updating technology. I'm going to Vietnam in October. I'm going to be doing some vlogging there and definitely want to make some upgrades before I do it. So please do support. Patreon membership is the best place, patreon.com/DhaiPhong. There are also one-time options as well in the links in the description. You can also subscribe on Substack, and you can buy me a coffee, whatever you think is best for you and whatever works for you. But Patreon is the best way, and you get perks and all sorts of other great, I wouldn't say exclusive content because I don't paywall any content, but you do get certain privileges, certain access, early access, audio, that sort of thing. It's a great community. So too is the YouTube community. So welcome all the members here from YouTube, as well as all of those from Patreon and Substack and everywhere else. It's great to be with you this evening. All right. So I just want to first talk about what I'm going to get to this evening. Okay. So this evening, I have many stories on the agenda, many stories. The first of which I'm going to talk about one that is quite disturbing. All right, quite disturbing. It definitely rang alarm bells for me. And that story is the drone strikes that occurred. No one was killed. No one was injured. But there were drone strikes that happened along the Estonian border. So they happened in Russia, a city in Russia. There were military aircraft destroyed in these drone strikes. And they came from these drones. They came likely from Estonia, because if they were to have come from Ukraine, they would have to flown over Belarus. Highly unlikely. Now I'm going to get to all of the reports, what we know, and what it really means, because I think this means a lot in terms of where this conflict is at. So that's the first story. The second story I'm going to get to is there are more escalations that the United States is ramping up with China, even as there are diplomatic visits like Raimundo, right? Like the Commerce Secretary, who is just finishing up a visit to China. So we are going to talk about not only that visit, but what are these escalations that have happened leading up to this visit, and then what has happened in parallel, because this is a pattern of escalation in parallel and in tandem with this so-called diplomacy. So we're going to get into that, because this one is, in fact, even more stark and scarier than prior. So there's those escalations. Then I'm going to talk about China and the tech war. China has made some huge strides in this tech war, and we are going to see exactly what these strides are and why the United States is so worried about them. And then finally, we have Putin announcing in October he is going to be, or at least he hasn't officially announced, but there are reports in the Western media saying that he is going to head to China during the Belt and Road Forum in October. And I'm going to talk about the significance of that, the historical context of Russia-China integration, and how they have begun and accelerated integration in their respective trade, interconnectivity routes, and their infrastructure development projects. So we have a lot to get to. This is going to be a very packed stream. And then perhaps if I have time, I want to get to what's happening in Gabon, but I don't know if I will have time for that. Not to mention what's happening in Gabon is still needing, I think, time to develop so we can fully understand it. But those are the stories, and I think we should get started. So welcome, everybody. So, I like to kind of start off streams light, and now we can get to the content part of this. Let me actually get Rockfin up, because, it looks like I haven't gone live on Rockfin yet. Apologies. Yeah. Sorry, everyone. All right, Rockfin, you should be live. I just didn't press that live button. Apologies. Welcome, everyone from Rockfin. Really appreciate all of your attendance. And, of course, you can follow me over on Rockfin as well. All right. Here we go. We got a few hours to cover, honestly. We got a few hours. We're going to be on here probably for at least 90 minutes, if not more than that. So before I begin, make sure you're liking the stream. We have 495 likes, 1,100 viewers. All right, over 1,100 viewers, only 400 and now 95 likes. Let's get that up closer to the 1,000 mark. Okay, everybody, let's get started. Ukraine has been launching drone strike after drone strike on Russia, hitting Russian territory whenever it can. The vast majority of these drone strikes have been utter failures. So a lot of these unmanned aerial vehicles, a lot of these drones end up crashing. They end up losing their direction, their route, losing control. Russia intercepts them. Russia strikes them down. There really hasn't been any deaths to these drone strikes, and in very few casualties. Now, these drone strikes have been happening over and over and over again. And one of them, actually, if you remember, several months back, actually struck the parliament building in Russia, the Duma. And this has been a sign, a signal of desperation, because these drone strikes have only ramped up as Ukraine has entered into the third month of its counteroffensive, and that counteroffensive has gone dreadfully. That counteroffensive has seen the loss of more than 43,000 of Ukraine's forces. It has seen a huge portion of its NATO arsenal completely destroyed, and Ukraine has not penetrated Russia's first defensive line, really playing around and going deep and losing a lot of forces to try to take very small parts of of Russian territory. So this has been a big problem for Ukraine. And these drone strikes have not been a sign of strength. They haven't changed anything on the battlefield. They have shown deep and utter weakness. And they're likely to continue. Now, there have been another set of drone strikes on Russia. And this time they have occurred on the border with Estonia. And so, as you all may know, Estonia is a NATO member. So let's take a look at the report here. First from RT. Drone attacks. This happened on August 29th. Drone attacks an airport in Russian city near a NATO border. The Pskov airport was attacked by unmanned aircraft close to 2 EU countries. So the Russian city of Pskov, near the territories of NATO members Estonia and Latvia, came under attack by a swarm of drones in the early hours of the 29th. The regional governor confirmed the raid, while videos showing explosions and air defenses lighting up the sky made the rounds of social media. The Russian military is repelling a drone attack on Pskov airport. Regional Governor Mikhail Venernikov confirmed on Telegram, adding that he was on site since the start of the incident. Initial information says there were no casualties. We are working to assess property damage. So all flights were canceled. And here are some of the pictures and images of the attacks here. So all from Telegram. So according to several Telegram channels, over a dozen drones targeted Pskov airport, and air defenses were engaging additional unmanned aerial vehicles. Social media footage showed what looked like an explosion accompanied by a sound of small arms fire. The Russian outlet Redovka claimed that 15 Ukrainian drones targeted the Pskov airport and were shot down, including with small arms fire. Something appeared to have crashed or exploded on the airport, and emergency services responded to the incident. There were no reports of casualties. So Telegram, so more Telegram channels. So as you know, Telegram is Russian social media. And you can find a lot of great information on Telegram about what's going on in this conflict. So the MASH Telegram channel reported that one of the drones may have struck a fuel depot and set it on fire, causing a thick black smoke to rise above the city. So this is the key thing, though. So if you have 15 drones attacking a Russian city, right, destroying military aircraft, this is only 700 kilometers north of Ukraine. So 700 kilometers north of Ukraine, but only 30 kilometers from the Estonian border, and the Latvian border is just 60 kilometers southwest, both being NATO member states. So the context is that Ukraine has previously sent these drone swarms at Crimea, where Russia's air defenses took care of them. And this has been a story on and on and on, that these drones have tried to attack Russian territory, destroy Russian infrastructure, target Russian civilians, and oftentimes they fail. But the problem here, again, is that we're talking about now, rather than it being an obvious Ukrainian attack, now there are suspicions that NATO directly conducted an attack. Estonia and Latvia, they run along Russia's border. They are NATO countries. They are former Soviet republics as well. And their admission into NATO decades ago was always a very, very, very touchy subject for Russia, right? Russia has not appreciated this. It has been one of the major reasons why Russia has cited NATO as a huge security risk, because these countries continue to enter NATO and threaten Russia's border, encircling Russia effectively. So that is the big danger here. that is a big danger here, is that NATO is encircling Russia, aiding Ukraine in a proxy war against Russia, throwing all this aid. Now you have drones entering Russia's territory, Russian cities, and they could very well have likely come from NATO countries, which would then mean that NATO directly attacked Russia. Now, of course, Estonia has denied this. And here's a report from Newsweek demonstrating this. Estonia denies link to Russian airport drone strike. Estonia's government denied a drone strike on the Russian city of Pskov on Tuesday denied a drone strike on the Russian city of Pskov on Tuesday could have come from the NATO member country after rumors spread online. And so it shouldn't be any wonder why these rumors spread, right? Because let's be honest, if we look at a map, if you look at a map, take a look at a map of Estonia, Latvia, and of course take a look at Ukraine. So if these drones came and targeted this city from Ukraine, they would have had to pass through eastern Belarus. And now we all know, or at least we should know, that Belarus is a staunch ally of Russia and likely wouldn't allow Ukrainian drones to enter its airspace without consequences. In fact, Belarus has said many times, and Lukashenko has said many times, that an attack on Russia's attack on Belarus and vice versa. And if you try to attack through Belarus, Belarus will defend itself. So it will not get caught up in such a conflict. So drone attacks hit targets on Tuesday in western regions of Bryansk, Oryol, Kaluga, Ryazan, Moscow, and Pskov. So it's many cities getting hit by drones now. In Pskov, close to the border of Estonia and Latvia, both European Union and NATO nations, fires broke out at a military airport following explosions with at least 4 I-76, or is that double I? I'm not a military expert. I need Brian Barletic here. So military transport aircraft were damaged. Drone attacks on Russian territory have become almost daily occurrences in recent weeks. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said in July that an 18-month-old war is gradually returning to Russia's territory, to its symbolic centers and its military bases, and what he described an inevitable, natural, and absolutely fair process. Ukraine has not claimed responsibility for the strikes as of this report. So this report occurred on the 30th, the day after these strikes occurred, but that has since changed, and I'm going to get to that. So there's a rumor that went around on Russian television that Turkish sources claimed that it was Estonia that conducted the strikes, and added, if it's true, then Estonia must be wiped off the face of the earth. There's no reasoning provided for the claims other than the distance between Estonia's border and Pskov. The Estonian government has firmly denied the claims. A statement sent to Newsweek from the spokesperson of the government office of the Republic of Estonia said this is false information. That is it. So that's all they said. They said this is false, right? And there's more to this. There's more. So let's continue, because this Newsweek article is showing the plethora of hypocrisy and contradictions embedded in this issue. You have Zelensky saying, and this is the point of the drone strikes, to try to play up that there's some kind of symbolic value, to try to create a theater of war where public relations can have it look like, well, now Ukraine has the upper hand because it's able to strike Russian territory. Mind you, they share a border. And if you have drones, then perhaps you can get through and start striking on Russia. However, they have not been very effective. And of course, Zelensky is not really keen on acknowledging this fact. But I digress. The point here, though, is that all Estonia could say was, this is false information. There is, though, reason to believe, and this is the comments that Newsweek wants to go over. They say, some of the comments about the strike note the distance between Pskov and the Ukrainian border. As a crow flies, the closest distance between the Russian city and Ukraine is about 310 miles. That would have required the drone to fly through the airspace of Belarus. Avoiding Belarusian airspace could extend the journey to 700 miles, depending on the route. So if they have to go 700 miles, it's highly unlikely that Russian air defense systems would not have picked that up. It's very highly unlikely. So in July, reports suggested Beaver drones could have been behind the attacks on Moscow, which are believed to have a range of in excess of 620 miles. Ukrainian state arms producer Ukroboronprom posted on Facebook that it successfully tested a drone with a range of 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles. So another problem here is that these drones may not be able to go that far, that they're just testing out drones that can go up to possibly the distance of 700 miles, but not likely if they have to go around Belarus's airspace. So the Russian Defense Ministry said that 2 Ukrainian drones have been shot down in Ryazan Oblast, southeast of Moscow, another drone in Kaluga, located southwest of the capital. So these drone strikes are happening, and there's a lot of fish. I mean, it's fishy. It doesn't smell good, right? It doesn't smell good that Russia is being attacked in this way, and now these drones are hitting cities very close to NATO member states with the potential that these drones do not have the capacity to get to Russia should they be Ukrainian, just using the technology at their disposal. It is likely that Estonia conducted this. We don't have verifiable proof of that. Estonia, of course, is going to deny it. But nonetheless, it is important to note that this attack could very well have come from NATO member states, because we know that Belarus is not going to allow Ukrainian drones to fly over its airspace to strike Russia. So now, all right, so to conclude what what Ukrainian forces have said about this. So at first, there was no acknowledgement from Ukraine's side, right? No acknowledgement that this had occurred. And or there was no acknowledgement that this was their fault. Before, in the past, you remember all of these drone strikes. Ukraine is quick to take credit, and Zelensky said it in that Newsweek article. He said, Russia's war is coming home. This is all about how terrible Russia is doing in the war. That has been the narrative, right? That these drone strikes show that Russia is actually losing control of the narrative and legitimacy is dwindling. The exact opposite is true, of course, but that's neither here nor there. Now you have Ukraine confirming that it was responsible for the drone strikes, supposedly. This was reported today, the last day of August, and this is very curious now, right? It's very suspect. At first, Ukraine did not want to confirm, did not want to take credit for this. Now, suddenly, Ukraine wants to take credit for this. So, BBC reports that Ukrainian government officials confirmed to the BBC that Ukraine was behind Wednesday's drone attack on a Russian airbase in Pskov. A number of Ulyushin transport planes were said to be damaged or destroyed. The official from the Ministry of Defense confirmed local reports that Ukrainian military intelligence GRU, or the GUR, was behind the attack. Meanwhile, President Zelensky said that Ukrainian-made weapons had hit a target at 700 kilometers distance. He did not specify the weapon or the target, but the distance could correspond to the Pskov attack. Ukraine believes that the planes were destroyed, that 4 planes were destroyed and 2 others damaged. Russian officials say 4 planes were damaged. The damaged aircraft are long-range cargo planes, ideal for transporting troops and equipment over long distances and therefore valuable war assets for Russia. Russia has vowed that this will not go unpunished. Ukraine's drone war in Russia is now almost a daily occurrence. Wednesday's attacks at Pskov, Bryansk, and elsewhere were among the most widespread so far. A fuel depot in Kaluga and a microelectronics factory in Bryansk, where components for Russian weapon systems are made, were also hit. So the mayor of Moscow, Sergei Sobyanin, said another drone had been shot down southeast of Moscow. Earlier, Russian media reported dozens of flights had been delayed at Moscow airports, a regular occurrence during drone attacks. In a telegram post, Bryansk regional governor Alexander Bogomaz said 3 drones have been shot down near Bryansk. So again, this is the scope of the problem here. Ukraine is unleashing drones on Russia. And it's doing so nearly every single day now, of course, with little effect. I mean, these military aircraft were likely destroyed. a small number. And of course, this is going to be played up as some kind of huge victory. But nonetheless, it really isn't. If you take the weight of what's happening in this counteroffensive, how much weaponry and manpower Ukraine is losing versus Russia, this is really just a drop in the bucket for Russia. But again, this is about narrative management and narrative control. And one of the things they can't control is how suspect this attack really looks. So Ukrainian officials are generally tight-lipped about attacks inside Russia, but it seems that as the campaign gathers pace, officials in Kiev are more willing to claim them as part of the country's war effort. And that's actually not 100% true. When these drone strikes occur, these drone strikes are generally credited to Ukraine, and Russia is very quick to out them as Ukrainian drone strikes. That is true. But one thing that that Ukraine really wants to promote is this idea that these strikes are happening almost organically, that they're almost like a rebellion against a colonial aggressor. That's how Ukraine has been trying to spin this war from the beginning, and that's how Zelensky and Ukraine's defense ministry and elsewhere are trying to spin it now. So, in effect, though, when we look at what's going on, and I want to pull up the Moscow Times because today they had today there were more drone strikes that I want to show you. The fact of the matter is, though, and here we have more reports, right? Russia, this is the Moscow Times, opposition. It's Russia opposition funded media, anti-Russia. So more drones headed for Moscow. This was today. Russian air defenses destroyed a drone as it approached Moscow. They said Thursday morning. Said Moscow's local government, air defense systems, and located around 60 kilometers from Russia's capital, destroyed a drone flying toward Moscow, said the mayor of Moscow. He did not specify where the drone had come from. Russia's defense ministry later said in the statement that the drone was Ukrainian. So they're going after the capital. Ukraine is going after the capital. But this attack on Pskov, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I'm probably not. Pskov. Russia is a very difficult language for me to grasp, and so I apologize to all my Russian viewers if there are any out there right now. But this attack on this airport, this is a serious thing. This is serious. It's a military aircraft, yes. Of course, these drone strikes are part of this conflict, and we can't expect Ukraine, if we know it has a record of trying to attack Moscow with drones, trying to hit Russian territory with drones, then of course we expect this from Ukraine. But at the same time, it is very difficult to imagine that this could have been done by Ukraine. Not because Ukraine doesn't have the will to do it, but because, and I want to show you a map now, briefly, all right? We'll go to Google Maps, evil Google. So here is the city, and let me see if I can actually zoom in, okay? Here's a city that was targeted, okay? So that's surrounded in red here. And of course, let me zoom out so you can see it. Can I get rid of this? Yes. Here's Estonia, here's Latvia. Here is where these drone strikes occurred. So as you can see, the distance is quite close. But let's see where Ukraine is. And as you can see, Ukraine cannot. So here's Belarus. So this is why it is very difficult to believe. Not just because of distance and whether the drones can hit Russia, Ukrainian drones can hit Russia. They can. But as you can see here, right, the distance to get to Pskov, right? So we're talking about, this is Pskov right here. Estonia, Latvia, of course, within a very short distance. And here is Ukraine. So Kiev, right? Kiev would have had to send their drones through eastern Belarus here in order to get to Pskov. And even if they went around, they would have had to cover all of this Russian territory, right? And then here you can see Bryansk. you can see where these drone strikes are happening. They're happening along the Russia-Ukrainian border, right? They're happening along where the conflict is taking place. So if Ukrainian intelligence were to have conducted this, they would have had to either have done it of course, they could have done it inside Russia if they have the ability and the capacity to. Perhaps they do. But then again, we're talking about a pretty competent Russian intelligence services as well. And so that's possible. But at the same time, it's also very possible, given Estonia and Latvia's position on Ukraine, given their NATO membership, given the fact that NATO has been collaborating, colluding with Ukraine, literally propping Ukraine up, it is also not out of the question that Estonia and Latvia could have launched these drones, maybe on behalf of Ukraine, maybe with the help of Ukraine, maybe it was a joint attack. But nonetheless, you can see here where there could be deep suspicions, right? Just given, we can zoom in again, given the distance, given how far the drones would have to travel. Perhaps they were launched from inside of Russia. Perhaps that is possible. But at the same time, Russia right now is very hyper vigilant on these attacks because they're happening almost daily. So Russia's security, both internally and externally, is very much on high alert. And that's how they've been able to stop any real casualties from occurring, is because these attacks are detected quite early and they're unsuccessful generally from the start. So given that this actually destroyed military aircraft, given that it's so close to Estonia and Latvia, given that Ukraine would have had difficulty launching them from within its own borders, what's left of them, then all of this is to say that we should be questioning whether NATO directly attacked Russia. This was the fear all along. And I'm just going to close up this map now. This was the fear all along with this conflict. This is why Russia was talking about its legitimate security interests. This is why Russia did not want to see NATO membership. And now you have NATO officials, Stoltenberg, you even have the United States, you have a lot of backdoor channels from the collective West trying to nudge Russia and say, well, just accept that Ukraine will be a NATO member and we'll give you all the territory. We'll just let you have it. We'll make Ukraine cede it. And Russia will never take such a deal. And it's because of the risks embodied in attacks like this. Because Russia always has to wonder, is its borders going to be violated? Is there going to be a military attack on it by an installation like NATO, which has a track record of doing this? This is why Russia has called NATO encirclement, has said Ukraine's NATO membership is a red line for it, because NATO has encroached on its borders. And now we're seeing in this conflict, the longer it goes on, the more Ukraine gets desperate and more desperate. All of this points to the potential of a possible NATO-Russia confrontation. And so, in my estimation, I believe there needs to be more investigations on this. I do not believe that Russia, given that there are potential attacks on Moscow seemingly daily by drone strike, given how these drone strikes have been so unsuccessful when they come from Ukraine, given that the technology is limited in the sense that Ukraine can't really launch a drone from Kiev or from most parts of Ukraine and get to this airfield, get to this military aircraft container with any real capability, without crossing Russia's ally, without crossing Belarusian airspace. Given all these factors, we have to wonder and we have to question just how much culpability do these NATO countries have? And of course, they're all trying to sweep it on the rug. And I think that's another interesting piece of this. And I think this is a pattern in this conflict that we're going to continue to see. We're not going to see, and I think sometimes people who are critical of NATO and who condemn what NATO is doing, they have this belief that what's going to happen is NATO is just going to declare war on Russia, or they're going to do something incredibly, incredibly dangerous and also take credit for it. I don't believe that's going to happen. I don't believe that NATO has that capability. I don't believe they're in a position of strength right now in this conflict. So, in that position of weakness, in that position of being beaten back, Ukraine is not winning this conflict. There's no military victory in sight for Ukraine. Given that, you're not going to see NATO take credit for anything. Estonia's statement was extremely brief. And mind you, Estonia is not even a government, to be honest. If you know the history of the not Sino-Soviet split, if you know the history of the fall of the Soviet Union, you know that Estonia was a republic of the Soviet Union and that it is one of the many NATO statelets that was basically created after the fall of the Soviet Union in order to weaken Russia. Many of these countries do not have stable governments or really any government at all. They're basically protectorates of NATO. They're basically mouthpieces of NATO. They're basically military outposts of NATO, and their economies have been devastated. Their regions, their countries, they've been destroyed. That's what they are. So it's not out of the question that they would participate in this way and not really have much to say about it, because there really isn't much dignity there. Where the questions need to go are to NATO itself, which I think is warranted given that NATO has a track record of building up and building up and building up toward war. And the Ukraine conflict was always part of it. It was always part of it. It was the next step in this larger neocon project against Russia. And these drone strikes, while as ineffectual as they are, and while they come in this context of desperation, and Ukraine just can't get out of its own way, despite the fact that they come out of this context, it doesn't mean that they aren't dangerous. It doesn't mean that these attacks are not dangerous. They are, because the more that Russia's territory gets attacked, the more Russia needs to defend itself. The more that Russia needs to defend itself, the more that NATO becomes frustrated. And the more frustrated NATO becomes, the more dangerous its actions become. And that is the cycle here. And the cycle starts with NATO and it ends with NATO. Russia is defending itself. This is Russian territory. This is Russia's country. No matter how much Ukraine wants to brag about how Russia's war is coming back to its borders, that was never the case. This was always a NATO encroachment. It was always a NATO proxy war. Zelensky is a mouthpiece of NATO, and these drone strikes, no matter if they're coming from Ukraine or Estonia, they are a NATO project. But once we start to look into whether now, and this is why this story is significant, now there are direct attacks coming from NATO countries, perhaps, or even if there's a suspicion of such a thing, well, then we have a problem that we've always had, and that is that NATO is designed to destroy Russia. That's what its purpose is. That's what its goal is. It's been its goal since the Cold War, during the Soviet era. That was what NATO was all about. It wasn't to defend Europe. It was to basically galvanize Europe and galvanize whoever it could regionally in order to destroy the Soviet Union and then, of course, Russia thereafter. That is the purpose of NATO. That is why these drone strikes are happening. They're ineffectual. They're pathetic. They're desperate, but they are a threat to global peace and security. And the reason is because now we're talking about the potential of a NATO country, or maybe possibly a couple of NATO countries, maybe colluding with Ukraine, working with Ukraine, amplifying Ukraine, helping Ukraine do such a thing. And that only spells danger. That only spells concern. We should not allow this to just get brushed under the rug, because we're going to see more of this. This conflict is not over. This is a war of attrition. Russia is winning the war, but we can expect Ukraine to get more and more desperate. We can expect NATO to get more and more desperate the more that this becomes a reality, the more that Russian victory becomes a reality. All right, everybody. We have almost 2,000 viewers almost. Great to have you all with me today. Please hit that like button. All right. Hit that like button. We have about 1,000 likes so far, almost 2,000 viewers. Let's get over 2,000. Let's keep the party going. I have many more stories to go. And we're going to get into these escalations by um, the United States against China. They're only getting more and more dangerous. And so we have to get into that. Then we're going to talk about Putin's potential visit to China, where Bloomberg has broken a story that Putin has indeed confirmed he's going to China. And we're going to close on that note. But everybody, like the stream, hit the subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. And of course, you know what to do in order to keep this channel going, keep the lights on, in order to make upgrades, help keep up with costs, help me reach sustainability. Patreon.com/DannyHaiphong, Patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. You can find that link in the video description. Also, go to the video description for one-time options, Substack membership, YouTube membership you can join through here. As always, everything is very much appreciated. I do shout-outs at the end to any Patreon subscribers, any Substack subscribers, YouTube super chats, members, etc. So we like to have fun here, and I do try to keep things very, very interactive. So much so that one of the stories today actually is a Patreon subscriber who brought something to my attention about this tech war, and I had to make a story about it because I thought it was that good. All right, so let me drink some water, and we'll be right to the next story. All right. Let's do this. So in the waning days of August, we had Gina Raimondo. She's a Commerce Secretary of the United States. She was in China for a couple of days, meeting with top Chinese officials around trade, top commerce and trade officials in China around trade and economic development, etc. And the tone of this visit was quite enthusiastic. It was quite enthusiastic. And this is another high-level visit from the United States. It started with Antony Blinken. Then you had Janet Yellen, John Kerry, and now you have Raimondo. So you have many U.S. officials going to China and essentially coming with their hands out, saying, we need help with our economy. We can't afford decoupling. But at the same time, talking escalation and aggression. And not only this, but I'm going to show you in a variety of instances just how the United States has not only faked diplomacy, and I'm talking about the United States is faking diplomacy here. The United States is engaging in diplomacy with China while it escalates with China militarily and economically. So at the same time that Raimundo is there, and you have all this positive enthusiasm, and indeed, there was progress made during this particular meeting. What surrounds it, and this is per usual for the United States, what surrounds it is a climate of escalation, aggression, and war. So I want to now just review how China viewed this visit. And we're going to listen to we're going to go over a few reports first. And then I'm going to talk about these escalations that are happening even as these talks are occurring, even as high-level U.S. officials are meeting. So here, the Global Times had this report coming from the meeting. China is willing to promote more trade dialogues with the U.S., but Washington is urged to meet Beijing halfway. So Chinese Premier Li Qiang expressed China's willingness to have more dialogues over trade issues when he met with U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo in Beijing on Tuesday, the second day of the U.S. trade chief's China visit. Meanwhile, Li called for more concrete efforts from the U.S. side to push forward sound development of relations between China and the U.S., the two world's largest economies. Li said that mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation are the correct ways for the U.S. and China to get along. Li noted that the essence of U.S. and China economic trade relations is mutual benefit and win-win results. It is hoped that the U.S. will meet China halfway. So Raimundo's high-level meeting comes. The high-level meeting comes after Raimundo's several candid constructive talks with top Chinese officials, said Vice Premier Dhaiphong, Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao, and Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao. During Raimundo's talks with He, the two agreed to maintain communication and support practical cooperation between enterprises of the two countries. After a 4.5-hour talk with Commerce Secretary Wang and Raimundo, the two sides announced plans to establish a new trade communication channel, including a working group consisting of Chinese and U.S. officials and business representatives to seek solutions on specific trade issues. So there you have it. You have candid talks, right? Meet us halfway. A lot of enthusiasm. Let's get this going. Let's increase the positivity. Let's make things happen. And I'm just going to play you one more brief report on this before I get into how fraudulent U.S. diplomacy really is, because the U.S. doesn't really do diplomacy. And I think anyone who's been following this channel understands why that is. So here's what CGTN had to say. They had a video on rebuilding trust, key numbers about this visit. So it has some good context. So let's listen in.
Hey guys, welcome to Reality Check. I'm Hong Jiyuan. We're talking about the U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo today, and let's do it differently. As a courtesy to her title, let's look at 3 sets of numbers. We start with 4 and 3. Gina Raimondo is the 4th high-level U.S. official to visit China in 3 months. 4th in 3 months. The visit did produce some results. The two countries set up a working group that will hold deputy ministerial level meetings twice a year to seek solutions to specific business issues. We've also initiated an export control information exchange mechanism to explain each country's export control system and improve communication. Raimondo said in an interview that these aren't the nebulous commitments to continue to talk. She emphasized that this is an official channel. Speaking of official channel, let's talk about the second set of numbers, 1 and 7. Raimondo is the first Commerce Secretary to visit China in 7 years. Since the previous administration, trade between the two countries has been increasingly distorted by the so-called national security concerns. Before her trip, one New York Times headline stated that Raimondo heads to China to both promote trade and restrict it.
So there you go. I mean, you have these visits happening. China shows enthusiasm with them, say, hey, this is a good idea. Let's keep the good times rolling. Let's make progress. And here you have the New York Times saying you're actually going there to restrict it and promote trade. This is the absolute pretzel that the United States is twisted in when it comes to China. And it gets worse than this. And I'll show you why later.
Building on the previous administration's policies, the Biden administration has specifically zeroed in on restricting technology transfers, exports, and investments to China, not just from the US, but from American allies. According to reports, the United States has put more than 1,300 Chinese companies under various sanctions. US tech companies like Intel and NVIDIA have suffered from US restrictions. NVIDIA's CFO warned that further restrictions could result in the permanent loss of an opportunity for.
So you heard it, opportunities for the US industry to compete and lead in one of the world's largest markets. But the point here is 1,300 trade restrictions and sanctions on China's high-tech industry. That's the big point here. That is what China wants Raimondo to address. That's what they wanted Janiello to address, although it fell a little bit outside of her scope, you could say, if you wanted to give her that excuse. But nonetheless, this is what China wants changed. It hasn't changed.
For the U.S. industry to compete and lead in one of the world's largest markets.
One of the things that we have to realize is that China is a leader in a lot of the high-tech leading-edge technologies like facial recognition and artificial intelligence and quantum computing already. And so I think one of the things that the United States is trying to do is really play a game of catch-up and trying to redirect a lot of our investment into our own work in the same area.
What's really worrisome to me is that they're emblematic of the state of affairs and state of relationship. And they're basically saying, you know, America is not trusting. We're very nervous and concerned about depending on China as a partner. And to me, this is the most worrisome part of it, because that needs to be fixed.
As Raimondo said herself, China and the United States have a more than $700 billion trade relationship, and that she wants to preserve it. So let's talk about the final number, the $700 billion. It represents a tight economic relationship. Besides Mexico and Canada, the two US neighbors, China is its largest trading partner. And if we take organizations like ASEAN and the EU out of the equation, China trades the most with the United States. That $700 billion binds the economic interests of the world's largest economies, or more than 40% of the global GDP together.
So we don't need to listen to any more of this because that's very self-explanatory. Now we need to get into, because now you have this situation, right? You have a situation of the fact that China is being targeted by sanctions. China is sanctioned heavily by the United States. The United States is playing a game of chicken with its diplomacy and attempting, and we do need to talk about the reasons for why it's having these talks, but nonetheless, these talks are occurring. And at the same time, nothing is really being given. China, of course, is going to be enthusiastic about any progress made, but nonetheless, further communication, that should just be a given. The problem here is that the United States is not showing any willingness to reduce these sanctions. And there's a reason why for this, because the United States wants to restrict, wants to contain, wants to weaken China in these areas. It's foolhardy and it's not going to work. But in the overall scheme of this escalation with China, it falls within the realm of these talks. But the problem is the United States is not just waging economic war on China. The United States is waging hybrid war. It's waging proxy war. It's waging a full-scale, total war on China. The war has not reached the point of confrontation militarily, direct confrontation, full-scale invasion, full-scale military conflict. That has not happened. However, it is a total war in the sense that in every aspect of warfare, there is an outright attack on China. And so even as this diplomacy is occurring, this diplomacy, I call it, you have many instances of aggression. And I'm going to show you how the United States sabotages it from the very beginning. They sabotage this diplomacy from the very beginning because they don't mean it. The United States and neocons, none of them, they don't mean it. In my opinion, this diplomacy is all about getting it out of the way. So when the 2024 election comes, the only thing that needs to be focused on is the so-called China threat and how to escalate with China. That they're getting it out of the way because this is what is needed. The United States cannot sever that big $700 billion trade volume worth of trade relations with China, economic relations with China. It can't sever that. But in order to focus on the political, the military, and also just the geostrategic and geopolitical aspects of its conflict with China for the election, the United States needs to get out this diplomacy, get it out of the way. That's my estimation for why it is happening. Now I'm going to go over several escalations from what's coming to what has already happened, and of course, to what is happening. So the first example here is friend of the show, Scott Ritter, his 2-minute topic report. I'm going to play you what he had to say about China, and this is China's a real warning that China has sent to the United States in many respects, which is stop these military games, stop these war games. We're going to defend ourselves whenever you wage any kind of war games, war preparations in the South China Sea, in the Asia Pacific, Taiwan, etc. But the warning is also that this economic war is just not going to work. So Scott Ritter is going to talk to us about what happened earlier in August, a trilateral summit between Japan, South Korea, and the United States. And these three countries together really make up the core. You could count Australia, and you could have also count several other countries that the United States has tried to court in an anti-China alliance. But these countries really do make up the core of this Cold War that the United States is trying to wage on China. So here's what Scott had to say so we can get some context for this summit.
Last week, U.S. President Joe Biden met with his South Korean and Japanese counterparts in a summit that was held in Camp David. There, they discussed the threats posed to them collectively from China and North Korea. In terms of China, they spoke of the South China Sea. They spoke of Taiwan. In terms of North Korea, they spoke of the nuclear threat. Did they come up with a solution to this? And the answer appears to be no. Words, words, and more words. Meetings, annual meetings, training exercises that already were happening, but now a new emphasis going to be placed on, but nothing new. And what's been the result? China, for what, has responded by carrying out their own training exercises, but these are of a scope and a scale that drive home the point that China isn't going to lose any future conflict between it and the United States, whether that is in the South China Sea, Taiwan. Interestingly enough, a U.S. Lieutenant General, Nato, who was responsible for wargaming conflict with China, has come to the same conclusion. He has briefed the White House that they need to tone back their rhetoric about China, because any rhetoric that leads us down a path towards conflict is preordained to end in a U.S. military defeat.
So, that's the most important context here. But the fact that the summit happened, it happened in the third week of August between Japan, South Korea, and the United States at Camp David in the United States. It was a show of force. It was meant to send China a message. But here you have the instance, right, of the United States pushing forward militarily against China, claiming this isn't about China. It's actually about the DPRK, but actually it's about China a bit. But really it's about North Korea, regardless of what they say it's about. Any activity between the United States and South Korea and Japan militarily is targeting China, because the United States has shown through the Quad, through AUKUS, through all of these attempts to build this kind of Asian NATO, that in fact all of its military ventures in the Asia Pacific are geared toward China and to escalate with China, not least the Taiwan Straits, which we're going to get to in a minute. But this is, of course, another instance. We'll let Scott finish here, but this is an instance where, as these diplomatic talks are supposedly going on, the United States is escalating elsewhere, arguably in more deep and troubling ways than any talks between commerce secretaries and trade officials could manifest. Whatever benefits, whatever progress they make, it's going to be canceled by things like this, by events like this, by policies like this. Let's continue.
But did that hold Joe Biden back from creating at least the illusion that there's some sort of alliance capable of standing up against China? Didn't hold him back, but reality is far different from the perception that was being created and crafted in Camp David. The same thing from North Korea. One only has to think back during the administration of President Donald Trump, when we had an American leader meeting with a North Korean leader to talk about denuclearization. Yes, it didn't happen, but at least they were talking about it. And it was there. The process was there on the table for Joe Biden to continue should he want to. He opted not to. Today, Joe Biden and his Japanese and South Korean counterparts talk about the need to bolster their relationship in the face of a North Korean nuclear threat that has expanded under his watch. North Korea today is capable of launching nuclear weapons that can destroy Japan, South Korea, and reach the United States.
So, I would quibble with Scott there and say that after Trump had those talks with Kim Jong-un in 2018, the United States, from the beginning, with Pelosi and these types, they sabotaged it immediately. They basically made it null and void. They rendered it null and void. So I would quibble with Scott to say that Biden could continue this policy. No, I think it was dead immediately. Dead. Like the United States wanted to I believe it was Trump's kind of signature foreign policy legacy. He was trying to build one in relation to DPRK. I thought it was a smart move, and I thought there was a lot of hope around it. But of course, and I thought also the Korea as a whole, the DPRK, South Korea, I believe it was their momentum that created the landscape for Donald Trump to be able to operate within. I don't believe it was just Trump saying, okay, I want to do this. I think the DPRK in South Korea, the former president of South Korea, Moon, and Kim Jong-un, that they were able to make huge progress, and the United States had to tag along. But the point, though, is not about South Korea or DPRK and the United States trying to corral Japan and South Korea together against the DPRK. It's about how all of this is also geared toward China, and how even as someone like Raimundo goes to China to talk trade, the United States is already building up militarily, and it gets worse. And we have to talk about Taiwan again. Every time I stream, every time I make a video, it is another escalation regarding Taiwan. And there are a couple here worth noting. First is that the United States has approved of a first ever military aid to Taiwan through a program typically reserved for sovereign nations. So why is this important? Well, because China has something called the One China principle. And this is actually recognized by international law. This is actually signed off on by the United States in several joint communiques. And this One China principle states that Taiwan is part of China, that even if there is a contested idea of which government should be the ruler of all of China, whether it should be the Republic of China located in Taiwan, or whether it should be the People's Republic of China in the mainland, the fact of the matter is that Taiwan is an inseparable part of China. That is the One China principle, and it is up to the governments on the Taiwan, on the Straits and mainland to work it out. And so the mainland holds that up. The People's Republic of China upholds that principle and says, this is an internal matter. This is a territorial issue. This is a sovereign issue. This is not about the United States or anyone else. And that Taiwan is part of China. Now, the United States has violated the One China principle from the very beginning. It passed the Taiwan Relations Act. It has sent weapons to Taiwan. It threatened nuclear war over Taiwan and many different instances. And the United States was the one responsible for keeping the People's Republic of China outside of the UN for more than 20 years after 1949. So the United States, of course, has no respect for the One China principle, even if it has signed off on many joint communiques saying it does. It has continuously sent arms, tens of billions of dollars worth of arms. There's a backlog of over $20 billion alone worth of armaments to Taiwan. And now the latest is just a little $80 million, not a huge sum in retrospect to what, let's say, what goes to Ukraine. But this amount, this $80 million, is being sent through the State Department's Foreign Military Financing Program. The FMF will be used to strengthen Taiwan's self-defense capabilities through joint combined defense capability, enhance maritime domain awareness, and maritime security capability, the department wrote in its notification to Congress. That was reviewed by CNN. So the State Department spokesperson confirmed it was the first ever transfer, consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act and our longstanding One China policy, which has not changed. As you can see, they're very defensive about this. It has not changed, but we are using a program that effectively says that Taiwan's a sovereign country, right? That's hypocrisy at its finest. The United States has an abiding interest in peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, which is critical to regional global security and prosperity. The newest development and continued support for Taiwan has drawn angry response from China, which claims the self-governing island as its own. China's foreign ministry responded, saying it's strongly dissatisfied and has firm opposition to the arms sales, which it said had harmed China's sovereignty and security interests and undermined peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. It urged the U.S. to cease enhancing Taiwan-U.S. military connections and arming Taiwan and stop creating tensions across the Taiwan Strait. That's what Wang Wenbin, the ministry spokesperson, said. China's defense ministry lashed out and said that China's military would take all necessary measures to counter this. So the United States has sold weapons to Taiwan in the past through a separate program called Foreign Military Sales. The FMF program will provide grant assistance paid by U.S. taxpayers to Taiwan in order to make those purchases. According to the letter sent to Congress, the sale could span a wide range of capabilities, including air and coastal defense, blah, 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 blah. The capabilities don't matter. Now, Brian Berletic, when he was going over these arms sales to Taiwan, he made a very good point that none of it has to do with capability. Capabilities are just something that the United States is never going to be able to build up in Taiwan to the point of being able to win any actual conflict. Sending these weapons, of course, help the military-industrial complex have a steady stream of profits from these contracts and sales. But I think most importantly, it is to provoke China. It is provocative. It is meant to anger China. It is meant to worsen relations, and it is meant to escalate. That is, I think, the biggest point about this. And the reason why this is so dangerous now is that this program is specifically geared toward towards sovereign independent countries. It is not geared toward the territories of countries, not within them. It is geared toward governments. And so that is why China is very mad. That is why it is very angry about this. But of course, it's a drop in the bucket when you consider the amount of aid that the United States provides to Taiwan. Or forget about Ukraine. Ukraine is on a different level right now because that conflict is at a different stage. But Taiwan, they're trying to turn into this porcupine that you hear security defense officials talk about. They're trying to turn it into another Ukraine. And they're doing so by violating China's sovereignty in the process, which makes it arguably even more serious should the conflict escalate even further. And it is escalating because as the United States is doing this, you have one of its biggest vassals, the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom can, especially in foreign policy, can rarely be called its own country anymore. It is truly a Western junior partner, if not a junior puppet state of the United States, especially when foreign policy is the concern. But Parliament now in the UK has called Taiwan an independent country as Cleverly visits China. So as you have Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, the top number one in command of the UK's so-called national security. As Cleverly is going through does this sound familiar? As he is on a diplomatic visit to China, you have UK's parliament calling Taiwan an independent country. It is called sabotage. It is called fake diplomacy. And the UK is doing it too. So the new language adopted in a report published on Wednesday by influential Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Commons risks staging a backlash from Beijing and comes as Cleverly becomes the first top British envoy to visit Beijing in 5 years amid a more frosty relationship. So that's what's happening. Taiwan is already an independent country under the Republic of China. The committee report says Taiwan possesses all the qualifications for statehood, including a permanent population, a defined territory, government, and capacity to enter relations with other states. It is only lacking greater recognition. This committee chairperson, Alicia Kearns from the ruling Conservative Party, says it's the first time the UK Parliament is making such a declaration. We acknowledge China's position, but we do not accept it. It is imperative. This is Politico. It is imperative the Foreign Secretary steadfastly and vocally stand by Taiwan and make clear we will uphold Taiwan's right to self-determination. So there you have it. The UK is doing the same thing, but the UK is doing this on behalf of the United States. So the United States sends weapons to Taiwan under the auspices of a program paid for by US taxpayers, mind you, that basically indirectly calls Taiwan an independent country because it is for independent countries. It's for supposedly sovereign countries. Although you could argue that all countries the United States ends up arming are not sovereign at all. They're either proxies, they're vassals, they're junior partners, but they're not independent. The U.S. controls their foreign policy. It controls their so-called national security state. But this is another step in the wrong direction. It is an escalation because it is doing so now in a territory that is not its own. It's doing so within China. And now you have the UK doing the same thing. So as you can see, no matter if it's Blinken, if it's Yellen, if it's John Kerry, if it's Raimondo, it doesn't matter. Every time this occurs, the so-called diplomacy, you have an escalation. Blinken, right after Blinken visited, what did Biden do? Biden said, Xi Jinping's a dictator. This was earlier in the spring. Then you had Janet Yellen come earlier in the summer, July. When Janet Yellen came, what happened? A travel warning to, U.S. citizens saying, don't go there. I was there, but I was there after the travel warning came out. I was already in China. Travel warning, don't go. You'll get arrested or whatever. You're in trouble. Each and every time CIA William Burns goes, he goes to China. He meets with Chinese officials. And then within China, he says, we're going to reopen our spy program on China. This is what you call sabotaging diplomacy. It's not diplomacy at all. It is all about saving face amid escalation, amid increasing calls for war. That is all it is. And so there's more, though, because this is not just about the past or the present. We have a future. And I'm actually going to be in Vietnam in October. And it looks like Joe Biden is also going to be in Vietnam, but a month before me. He's going this coming month in September. And China's not impressed by this, but the U.S. and Vietnam are eyeing developing ties to a higher level, says China. China's Global Times, as Washington puts more efforts into using or forcing China's neighbors to join a U.S.-launched Indo-Pacific strategy and major power competition that aims to contain China's development. Chinese analysts believe in order to boost its own development, Vietnam wants to benefit from a U.S. strategy, but that it will not be used by the U.S. to contain China. The socialist country in the Southeast Asian nation enjoys a high level of mutual trust and deep cooperation with China, while there will be limits on closer U.S.-Vietnam ties due to complicated ideological and historical reasons. So he's heading to Vietnam in September to meet with the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Central Committee, Nguyen Phu Trong. The White House announced on Monday the U.S. president will arrive in Hanoi on September 10th, taking on a one-day visit to the Vietnamese capital after attending the G20's Leaders Summit in India. And they're going to explore opportunities for trade, technology, innovation, climate change, peace, and stability in the region. But China is up on the game. The game is containment. The game is let's get these countries together to attack China. That is what the point of all of this is. The diplomacy is fake. It doesn't mean anything. The United States is not in the business of diplomacy. It is in the business of war. Literally, U.S. taxpayers are funding arms to Taiwan. It may not seem like a lot, 80 million in the scope of $40+ billion to Ukraine's armed forces, or when you think about this albatross military budget that's in the trillions off the books and then on the books close to $1 trillion. When you have these numbers being thrown around, we can't even fathom that kind of money, to be honest. Most people cannot. No one really can, but it is an astronomical sum. But even so, even the small relative sum is still being used by U.S. tax dollars, and it is escalating a political and military conflict between the U.S. and China that only serves to sabotage this diplomacy. So in effect, you do not have diplomacy occurring between the U.S. and China. You have war. And the United States is the one waging that war. And it is going to continue. It is going to continue in the realm of economic warfare. It's going to continue in the realm of military escalation. And it's also going to continue in the realm of political and ideological and propaganda operations as well. That is well known. That's why China says, meet us halfway. Show us the money. Show us that these meetings are about more than saving face, public relations, political manipulation, whatever, psyops, whatever. Show us more. And the United States never does. So even as Raimondo's visit has some enthusiastic qualities to it, it has some encouraging qualities to it from the Chinese side, more communication, the potential to work through some of these issues. We still haven't seen concrete action taken for the better. The United States has not lifted sanctions. It is not changing its tone, and it is moving on violating probably the most dangerous aspect of this conflict, which is trying to wage a campaign against China, military campaign against China via Taiwan, which is its sovereign territory. It is a red line. So here you go, the United States, just like it crossed with Russia, crossing China's red line as well. And it's doing so with more ferocity, even as it's talking in the background saying that it doesn't want to decouple, it doesn't want to sever ties, it doesn't want to escalate with China. That's a lie. It does. They're lying. Biden is lying. The United States government, the neocons, they're lying. The military establishment, the foreign policy establishment, they're all lying. And China's aware of this. That's why China sends repeated warnings. Don't do it. Go to Vietnam. It's going to be fruitless. You're not going to get Vietnam to renege or separate from the Belt and Road Initiative or from U.S. or from China-Vietnam ties. Stop the tech war, stop the sanctions war. It's not going to work out for you. It's only going to make China more self-reliant, and the United States fall further behind. And of course, stop the violations of the One China principle, because China is prepared and ready to fight a conflict. It is prepared and willing and ready if it has to. It's a last resort. It doesn't want to. China has said over and over again, it's never shown any indication it wants a conflict with the United States, but it's ready. It will be ready. That's why Taiwan gets encircled in rapid time every time the United States violates the One China principle diplomatically through official visits and what have you to Taiwan, which there have been several in the last year and a half alone. So that is all for that topic, because we have a couple of China topics before I get to the Putin-Xi visit. All right. And I'm packing in a lot of stories here because there's a lot going on. And I don't even think I'm going to have time to get to Gabon today, although I totally support any movement away from French colonialism and the ongoing neo-colonial domination of the continent. So we will have to just see how that transpires. And I want to try to have Africa Stream on here and trying to get Richard Medhurst on here. I'll get to the announcements at the end, but I'm trying to get people on here who've been covering the Africa situation a lot closer than I have been able to do. So nonetheless, though, I want to get to another China story. This one actually from a Patreon subscriber who wanted me to comment on the tech war. And he sent me an article, which I will get through, a CNN report. And we'll watch that report because I do find it fascinating. I'm going to couch it in an announcement. So let's get to this, okay? Let me just bear with me as I get the sources ready here. We have 1,800 viewers, by the way. Thank you for sticking around. And we have 1,590 likes, so we're close to the ratio. So thanks so much for making this stream beautiful. China has defeated the tech war that the United States has been waging on it for several years, beginning with the Trump administration's decision to escalate Obama's pivot to Asia by claiming China's technology advances were a threat to the U.S.'s national security, and subsequently sanctioning China's biggest tech corporations, such as Huawei. And China has defeated this tech war, and it's been a long and grueling process, one that has not come without consequences. When I was in China, I spoke to people, and I was in China from the 1st to the 11th. And when I would speak to people about this, especially younger people, who are really kind of in the tech world, especially just in terms of using it and purchasing and being consumers of it, they talked about some of the challenges with the sanctions on Huawei, for example, which is China's leading producer of 5G technology and cellular technology, telecommunications. Huawei, the sanctions on Huawei, the attempt to cut it off from the international market, especially in relation to semiconductor chips with the semiconductor bans and the export bans and all these bans the United States has been trying to extrajudicially impose upon the planet, Huawei fell behind. Huawei was not able to keep up. Huawei actually was not able to produce a 5G phone in what was then its latest model. But now things have changed. And right after I got back from China, actually, Reuters reported that Huawei announced it had made a breakthrough in its chip development technology and was ready to release a new phone that would demonstrate its new capabilities. And now that phone has been released. It's the Huawei Mate 60 Pro. And Huawei introduced, so this is from CGTN, a report. Huawei introduced its flagship smartphone with an apparently advanced in-house processor, leaving the world guessing how the Chinese tech giant secured the component despite years of blacklisting. The Shenzhen-based company on Tuesday unveiled its Mate 60 Pro device with no launch event held, no advance notice, and no advertising. The company announced in an open letter that the Mate 60 Pro is the most powerful Mate model ever, selling for $960. The new product supports incoming and outgoing calls via satellite when there is no ground network. Users can also generate travel track maps via satellite and send out location messages. The first batch of the new product went out of stock in minutes after the launch as enthusiasts and early adopters rushed to purchase the phone to explore the features. The company did specify that the new phone features 5G connectivity, while the growing number of online users who managed to buy the phone posting videos to show the phone could match the network speeds of 5G chipset. The company upgraded its glass materials, which provides twice the durability as before. It also has an embedded its AI large model. It also features an AI air-to-air control, smart payment functions such as keeping the screen on while watching. So it's a big announcement. It's a big defeat for the United States because the United States has targeted Huawei. The United States had in Canada Meng Wanzhou in house arrest for over a year in Canada. And of course, Huawei has been blacklisted. And now I'm going to also show you, friend of the show, Carl Za, when we talk about 5G technology, a Chinese live streamer he posted showed viewers, and I'm actually not going to play the video, it's all in Chinese, but he says the Chinese live streamer disassembled Huawei Mate Pro 60 live and verified that it's a 5G phone and it has Kirin 9000's chipset made in China. 100% Chinese-made components. U.S. sanctions failed to kill Huawei. So this is incredible news. And then friend of the show, Andy Borm as well, who I had the pleasure meeting in Shanghai, said it's historic. Huawei's Mate Pro 60 Pro uses 100% Chinese component, including chips. It was released the day U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo, behind sanctions stopping China importing certain chips, visited Beijing. Sanctions against China will only bite Washington in the you-know-what. So a lot of enthusiasm about this. And there is no doubt that China is advancing technologically and in a self-reliant manner. I think faster than anything the United States could have predicted given its sanctions. And so this is the blowback from sanctions the United States is experiencing right now. The United States thinks and believes that unilateral sanctions, economic sanctions, are universally effective. That if you can starve a Venezuela or Cuba, countries that are already historically underdeveloped because of the United States' foreign policy, because of European colonialism, because of a long history of foreign interference, because it might work temporarily on these countries. And mind you, Venezuela and Cuba have been resilient in their own ways. But because of their relative isolation, they have not been able to make the technological progress of, let's say, China. But still, the motive and the ideological bedrock of sanctions is that if it can work on these poor, smaller countries, it can work on any country. So the United States expanded its sanctions regime. It's nearly 30 countries wide. A huge portion of the population, I think more than a third of the population, finds itself under U.S. or U.S.-backed sanctions. And so Huawei, the sanctions on Huawei are fierce. It is a blacklist. It is a complete and total attempt to ban Huawei's use anywhere and everywhere the U.S. can extend its sphere of influence. And you've seen European countries attempt to do the same thing, the UK, on and on and on, and EU countries attempt to raise the concern of national security and European security and claim Huawei is the big threat. Now, Huawei is showing that China it has pretty deep technological advantages, and it extends far beyond Huawei. So this Mate 60 Pro is just one example of how China is absolutely annihilating these sanctions. And this is very important because this should give us hope that the United States' day as an empire is starting to set. The sun is starting to set on it. So here's another breakthrough. Revolutionizing, so this is written by the South China Morning Post. Revolutionizing the semiconductor industry, Chinese scientists unveiled a 12-inch wafer with groundbreaking 2D materials. Researchers have managed to produce new 12-inch wafers that are just 1 atom thick and have low production costs. Work still needs to be done to transform them into usable chip, but scientists say they will eventually complement silicon chips. So a breakthrough in the production of a new two-dimensional material, which is its thickness is about 1 atom, is set to pave the way for a transition in next-generation semiconductors. Chinese scientists have managed to use 12 new semiconductor materials to produce 12-inch wafers. The milestone could see them complement traditional silicone chips. As new 2D material is so thin, it gives the wafers excellent semiconductor properties, but the team of scientists had to solve issues around the scaling up of the wafer size and being able to produce them at high capacity. Lu Kuhai of Peking University, who is a lead scientist on the project, said his team's work has given assurances to the industry of the practical applications of the 2D material. We proved to the industry that this is scientifically feasible and instill confidence. If there are industrial demands in the future, progress in this field will advance by leaps and bounds. And those industrial demands could very well be that China is cut off from the semiconductor industry because of the U.S.'s semiconductor export ban of technology. And that's a ban that has also attempted to slow down China's growth in computer technology and 5G technology and the ability to produce and distribute high technology. So in collaboration with Professor Lu Kan at Renmin University of China and Professor Zhang Guangyu at Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, the team developed manufacturing strategy in Beijing and verified it at Songshan Lake Materials Laboratory in Dongguan. They published a paper of their findings in a peer-reviewed journal, Science Bulletin, on July 30th. Though silicon is well suited for semiconductor processing, current silicon chips have met difficulties as sizes continue to decrease. Silicon transistors are made thinner, their control voltage becomes worse. Current will exist even when the device is not working. This brings extra energy costs and heat generation. So in effect, you have a huge, I'm not going to go over this whole article because I do not want to go over necessarily the tech aspects of this, but you have a huge development there. China, through these sanctions, is speeding up the pace of its own development, its own breakthroughs. That seemingly would be counterintuitive to how the United States believed sanctions were going to work. In effect, the sanctions have failed. But it doesn't just stop there, okay? Because this is a problem for the United States deeper than even semiconductors or high technology. This is all across the sphere of tech. And I want to show you why that is. So you all know the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute, or ASPI, is probably the foremost, it's Australian based, but really it's a mouthpiece of the United States government, as is really the entire country of Australia is just a military and political playground of the United States at this point when it comes to China. ASPI is probably the most renowned, if I can say renowned. It is the loudest, it is the most obnoxious, it is the most maybe well-funded, at least for a time, institution meant to forward a propaganda war on China. It was made most famous by promoting the work of people like Adrian Zenz and others. And of course, Nathan Rousser. I don't know if you remember him, the young 18-year-old child who was spreading all this misinformation about Uyghurs in China. ASPI, gets all of its funding from military contractors, the Australian Defense Department, the U.S. Department of State and Defense. And so it is a fully backed subsidiary of the United States' anti-China agenda. But even ASPI has to admit, and here's the admission. According to its critical technology tracker, what's the problem? Western democracies are losing the global tech competition, including race for scientific and research breakthroughs like that 2D technology for semiconductors and the ability to retain global talent. China, here we go. Their research reveals that China has built the foundation to position itself as the world's leading science and technology superpower by establishing a sometimes stunning lead in high impact research across the majority of critical and emerging technological domains. China's global lead extends to 37 out of 44 technologies that ASPE is now tracking, covering a range of crucial technology fields spanning defense, space, robotics, energy and environment, biotechnology, artificial intelligence, advanced materials, and key quantum areas. The Critical Technology Tracker shows that for some technologies, all of the world's top 10 leading research institutions are based in China and are collectively generating 9 times more high-impact research papers than the second-ranked country, most often the US. The Chinese Academy of Sciences ranks highly first or second across many of the 44 technologies included in the technology tracker. We also see China's efforts bolstered through talent and knowledge import. 1/5 of high-impact papers are being authored by researchers with postgraduate training in a Five Eyes country. China's lead is the product of deliberate design, long-term policy planning, as repeatedly outlined by Xi Jinping and his predecessors. So I think that's pretty damning, wouldn't you say? Wouldn't you say that that's a pretty big admission that the United States is far behind China, and that this could have something to do with why the United States is constantly attempting to contain China's technological progress? Maybe it has something to do with it. So this is what we have. We have China taking the lead, making these huge breakthroughs. It is beating the attempted ban on semiconductors. It is beating this ban on chips. It is beating the attacks on Huawei. In effect, China has been winning. If we're calling this a war, even if the war is the United States unilaterally attempting to do all of this, China hasn't been trying to arrest the US's economic development. Honestly, China doesn't have to do that. The United States does it to itself. The United States deindustrializes itself. The United States doesn't invest in high technology. It doesn't put in the government funds needed. It doesn't try to develop high state-of-the-art infrastructure like high-speed rail, which could be very critical in helping people build up the capacity and knowledge to develop this technology, make transportation easier, make it more affordable, make education more affordable, make it more accessible, prioritize these things. The United States doesn't do this. The United States has its head deep in the sands of war. It has its head deep into the floor of speculation and big finance. And so the United States has always been destined to lose this. And its policies of sanctions are not helping. And so now I want to show you, everyone's talking about AI these days. Is AI going to take our jobs? Is AI going to replace us as humans? Is it going to be able to do everything? And then we'll be controlled by AI. I don't like to get into that, what I think is baseless speculation. I think there will always be humans that are needed to advance and run this AI technology. I think a lot of the same concerns around computer generation and things like that existed. I don't think that technology can truly be outside of the hands of labor, that labor will always have a role in the development of technology. And that means including the technology that will build the technology, as redundant as that may seem. That's the labor theory of value, my friends. But I want you to, this was a Patreon subscriber sent this to me, and I wanted to couch it within this larger framework of the United States losing this tech war, because CNN has a really interesting report on China's AI, and it gets to the core of why the United States is in fact waging this tech conflict with China. It's not just about tech competition. It's about what it means for the tech industry as a whole. It's about what it means for the economy as a whole globally. All right. So I'm I want to play this. This is a very interesting segment talking about the fears that the United States and its talking heads of the elite and have to say what they think about China's development of AI technology and kicking the US's can in this area. Here we go.
China has become one of the first countries to build guardrails for the technology that powers popular artificial intelligence services. The recently unveiled guidelines will take effect in about 2 weeks. CNN's Christy Lustout has the story.
Meet Xi Jiajiang, a virtual idol powered by artificial intelligence to sell burgers in China. McDonald's hired Jiajia to interact with Chinese customers. The U.S. may be curbing AI chip exports to China, but the nation is fast becoming an AI powerhouse. The country is home to top tech firms leading the AI charge like Alibaba, Huawei, Tencent, and Baidu, creator of Xi Jiajia, boasts that its chatbot Ernie has beaten OpenAI's ChatGPT on several metrics. At the state-backed World AI Conference in July, billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk praised China's AI prowess.
So before we get to what Elon Musk has to say, I met up with a few people in Shanghai who were trying to get into this conference and they could not get in. And they told me you needed to get a ticket in advance, like more than a month after it was announced. And you had to get the ticket right away because it was sold out, because there's so much demand and so much interest in the development of AI technology and this conference. But here is Mr. Musk.
China will have very strong AI capability, is my prediction.
China has become one of the first countries in the world to regulate the technology that powers popular services like ChatGPT. In July, it unveiled interim rules to manage generative AI, saying it needs to be in line with the core values of socialism.
The Chinese government is trying to...
Oh, no. Before we get into the Hong Kong professor who is going to just tell you that China is trying to make AI fit within its moral code, the point here is that this is what the concern really is that a country is trying, like China is trying to regulate AI to help it fit within national interests. That's really the concern. Of course, that China calls itself socialist and has a socialist governance system only adds to the anxiety. But here we go.
To ensure that the use and application of AI will be aligned with its own set of moral principles that underscores its political and social stability. The government not only placed the burden on the service providers, but also on the users of AI services.
In January, China's new rules against...
So before we get into the rules, what she means, she's trying to make this seem nefarious, that China is not just saying those who provide AI systems like ChatGPT are going to be regulated, but also the individuals are going to be regulated, meaning that their behavior is going to be watched and suppressed. It's not exactly like that, and they're about to explain.
Since deepfake technologies came into effect, Chinese authorities have detained people for allegedly using generative AI to commit fraud and create fake news.
And while China is moving fast to regulate the industry, some critics warn that it may not be equipped to avoid an AI disaster.
So here's the disaster part, but the key word here is regulation. So China does punish people, let's say, if you have, for example, it has strong laws around porn. So if you try to engage in AI platforms like any other platform in pornography or some kind of solicitation that way, sexually exploitative, you're going to be punished. If you're going to commit fraud, business fraud, you're going to try to rip people off, then you'll be punished. That is regulation. That is not trying to impose or control people's so-called liberties. Now they're going to get to the disaster, and just watch who they get to talk to about why this is going to be a disaster for China, right? It doesn't have the capabilities, they say, to regulate AI. Just watch who they parade out to talk about this.
Most societies kind of learn from disasters, but The PRC has a kind of propaganda machine that makes it hard to do that, where there's a sort of disaster amnesia. There's a kind of a chronic
disaster amnesia. This is coming from, and sorry that the pause button's over, Bill Drexel, who is the Associate Fellow for Technology and National Security Programs at CNAS, Center for New American Security. And I've covered over and over and over again what CNAS is. CNAS, Center for New American Security, is a wholly funded subsidiary of the Department of Defense. It is a military contractor funded, State Department funded think tank that literally projects the most vile and vapid neocon foreign policy propaganda. So this is very rich, coming from someone who literally is schooled and trained and paid by an institution whose whole entire purpose is to escalate conflict. CNES, mind you, has multiple times, including on Meet the Press, had war simulations with China. War simulations played out in U.S. mainstream media, and CNES is the one backing them. CNES is a militarist, warmongering think tank promoting propaganda, and here it's saying that China won't be able to control AI, as if it has any expertise.
On a culture of crisis mismanagement in authoritarian regimes generally, and China's no exception.
Drexel cites China.
China is no exception. China has disaster amnesia. This is just pure projection. The United States, mind you, has been through 3 economic crises since 2007, 2008, is in a period of dwindling living standards, continues to get into disastrous war and disastrous war, Ukraine notwithstanding being a dreadful quagmire, which the United States cannot get out of and continues to escalate within, despite the risks of confrontation with Russia, despite the economic cost on the world economy, despite all of this. The United States has gone disaster and after disaster after disaster, just forgot about it. Not really forgetting, it's intentional, it's willful, it's meant to be a psychological operation. So we'll all forget. You know, the United States, political officials, the neocon foreign policy establishment, they don't like to talk about Iraq. They don't even like to talk about Afghanistan, which we just went through the 2nd anniversary of the U.S.'s ejection from Afghanistan. The United States doesn't like to talk about that. The United States doesn't like to talk about all of the conflicts it has mired itself in which it has effectively lost. Doesn't like to talk about Libya's catastrophe. Doesn't like to talk about Syria remains occupied, but they never won their objectives in Syria. The government is still there. Bashar al-Assad is not going away anytime soon until he steps down and there's an election for a new president. That the United States gets into disaster after disaster with few, if not completely and utterly negative results. And yet you have CNES talking about how it's China through its regulation of AI. That's the problem. And this is why the neocon foreign policy establishment and the willful mainstream media profiting from it have people's brains completely hollowed out and sent into this abyss of anti-China hysteria and propaganda. But let's just finish.
China's zero COVID policy as a recent example of crisis mismanagement. But the danger posed by AI is not limited to one country. Top technologists the world over, including China, have signed this petition to warn of the risk of human extinction from AI.
As these systems get very, very powerful, that does require special concern, and it has global impact. So it also requires global cooperation.
I love how these Silicon Valley corporatists, these capitalist monopolists, they love to talk about extinction. They love to talk about, oh, the world is going to be imperiled by technology that we're trying to develop so we can make a lot of money from. Meanwhile, the contracts, the collaboration, the cooperation from Silicon Valley, big tech corporations with the military industrial complex is literally threatening human extinction right now. If you believe in climate change or you don't believe in climate change, or you question it or question the motives or the policies or the ways in which the West addresses it, whatever, mind you, the environment is in pretty rough shape. And that is because of the actions of monopolists and bankers and oil corporations and fossil fuel corporations. That is their fault. Big tech corporations, military contractors, they're also leading us into the abyss, into the potential nuclear stone age via a conflict with nuclear weapons. And they're here talking to you about how we need global cooperation around AI technology. Well, they are reporting on how China in its regulation of AI is the problem. Well, isn't that not just confusing, but just utter horse shit? You know what I mean. It is absolute trash. This is what passes for media, for journalism within the halls of the empire, within the completely war-obsessed mainstream corporate media. And so there is a lot of bitter pills to swallow here, and they just can't swallow them. And I'm just going to end it here. I'm going to end this story here because the point is that CNN is raving and ranting about China's core socialist values, right? Things like democracy, things like prosperity. These are core socialist values in China. You can go all around China, see them posted up everywhere. They're not the most, let's say, threatening of values. They really are just about how people should behave, how a society should be governed, rule of law, things like that. It's really not that controversial. But the reality is that the fact that China is winning this tech war, China is developing not just AI technology and rolling over the United States in these categories, but also developing regulations so that this technology serves national interests. It also serves their foreign policy interests, like building up interconnectivity, better trade relations with other countries. This is a threat to the United States because the United States is seeing itself be outmoded. And the root of this decline, the root of this stagnation is the United States itself and its political economy. It's monopolist and neoliberal and neocon run and driven political economy, which now is wholly dependent upon war and speculation. Those two things are anathema to development itself. And China has the opposite going for it. It has an industrial economy. It is basing itself on domestic-driven demand, expanding that into international cooperation, and therefore seeing great results in the area of technology. And it has won the tech war. It's won the tech war. The sanctions have not worked. They're pearl clutching over AI. Their propagandist think tanks like ASPI are admitting to the fact that China is kicking their behinds in nearly every realm of high technology. And Huawei Mate 60 Pro, this new phone, not only sports 5G technology, but it sports all of the components domestically driven and produced. That means that China is finding its way out of these sanctions, and that these sanctions are not going to be, they're not even going to have an impact at some point, which means there are only going to be more escalations, which means that this diplomacy that the United States has been engaging in with China is fake. And it means that the tide of war, the escalation toward war with China becomes only more real, because this is about China's ascendance. It is about how China is both surpassing the United States and offering a different model to the United States. That U.S. hegemony is dying. We saw it with the BRICS summit. We see it time and time again, and China's right at the center of it all, if not the center of it all. It's the center of trade connectivity. It's the center of global economic development. It's the center of high technology. It's the center of state-of-the-art infrastructure. It's the center of poverty alleviation. It's the center of renewable energy development and production. It's the center of development itself at this stage, and the United States cannot take it. The neocons can't handle it. The militarists, the corporatists, the monopolists, they cannot handle it. And so that's why you have a war on China. And China has, at this moment, China has and can arguably declare victory over the tech war. All right, everybody. So it's 11 o'clock. I have one more story already to do. And we have a lot. We covered a lot today. All right. So I'm just going to take a breather. It's one of these things, streaming, where if you stop doing it for like 6 days, the stamina kind of goes away. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming on. We have 1,600 viewers still and 1,800 likes, so it's great. Thank you for all the super chats. Thanks to all the members. I'm going to get to all of you. So let's go. Last story. This is a doozy. This is a doozy for me, and it's gonna take some. We're gonna be going through a lot of reports here, a lot of data. We're gonna be talking about the Belt and Road Initiative. All right. And why are we talking about the Belt and Road Initiative? Well, we're talking about China and Russia. And we're going to be talking about Putin going to China in October. All right. So let's do this. And that will conclude today's stream. And I'll get to some announcements and what have you. I may have to put you guys on pause for a little bit and get some more water. I'm out. All right. It's official. Vladimir Putin will be traveling to China in October for the Belt and Road Initiative Forum. And this is huge news. And it's news that has been known. And I'll show you how China has, first of all, China extended the invitation and Putin accepted it relatively quickly. But there's always speculation because if you remember this summer, Vladimir Putin was slapped with ICC sanctions. And those sanctions stipulated that Putin was a war criminal, and according to the Rome Statute, any signatory to the ICC would need to arrest Vladimir Putin or issue an arrest warrant if he entered their sovereign territory. So if they're going to comply with ICC rules, which in effect are US and Western rules, mainly for underdeveloped African countries, if you're going to follow the ICC, if you're going to follow the so-called International Criminal Court and its supposedly just diktats, then you're going to arrest Vladimir Putin. It's the reason why Vladimir Putin did not attend the BRICS summit, the 15th BRICS summit in Johannesburg, South Africa. It's because South Africa is a signatory of the Rome Statute, and the United States twisted its arm and said, if you allow Vladimir Putin onto your territory, you're going to have to arrest Vladimir Putin. So Russia was the adult in the room and said, all right, we'll accommodate you, South Africa. We care about the summit. We're not going to let anything take away from BRICS here. And we'll stay back. Sergei Lavrov can go, and I'll join by video link. No problem. And in effect, Russia, of course, next year, Russia's going to host the BRICS summit, and Russia played a big part in this expansion of BRICS and all of the other outcomes of that monumental and historic summit. Now, Vladimir Putin is going to go to China, and Bloomberg wanted to take credit for a so-called breaking exclusive report And here it is. So this report was August 29th, says Putin agrees to visit China in first trip since arrest warrant issued by the ICC in March. Russian President Vladimir Putin has agreed to make his first foreign trip since the warrant for his arrest on alleged war crimes was issued by the ICC. Russia is preparing Putin's visit to China for the Belt and Road Forum in October, according to 3 people with knowledge of the matter who asked not to be identified because the issue is sensitive. Putin has accepted the invitation from Chinese President Xi Jinping to attend the event, one of them said. Putin hasn't left Russia since the court in The Hague announced the warrant in March, though he visited Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. He skipped the BRICS summit in South Africa after the government made clear it would have to comply with in order to arrest him as a signatory of the ICC. He also told Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi that he won't attend next month's G20 summit, though India isn't a signatory to the court. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said earlier this month that he expected to host Putin for talks in August. Instead, Erdogan plans to travel to Russia, Sochi next week to meet with the Russian leader. Dmitry Peskov didn't immediately respond to a request to comment, and China's foreign ministry didn't immediately respond to question outside of normal business hours. So, essentially, this is supposedly anonymous sources, okay? However, let's be clear here. The Western mainstream media didn't break anything. Bloomberg didn't break anything, and I'll show you why. Back in July, you had the Global Times report Putin's visit to China during BRI forum in October shows Russia's support to China. Vladimir Putin's visit to China during the Belt and Road Forum international cooperation shows Russia's support to China, and the two countries are expected to enhance cooperation during the visit. Vladimir Putin's visit to China is scheduled for October when they will host the One Belt, One Road Forum in China. Putin's aide Yuri Ushakov said on Tuesday, according to Russia's state news agency TASS, "We received the invitation and plan to go to China," Ushakov said. So there you go. There you have Bloomberg puffing its chest out at the end of August, saying, "We broke the story. Vladimir Putin is going to go to China. Wow. And he's going to do it despite the ICC ruling, despite the ICC arrest warrant." In Russia, in July 26th, had announced that, of course, it's going to go. And, of course, Putin's been to China 17 times. There was, of course, the latest March meeting in Moscow that occurred between Xi and Putin, which was a huge deal. But you remember right before the conflict, Putin was in China during the Beijing Winter Olympics, and they released a huge document, right? Russia and China did, outlining their support for each other. So, in effect, no breaking news here. The mainstream media tries to take credit for things that it never should get credit for. This was always known, but it's important to cover. And the reason why I want to cover this is because oftentimes, I'm going to show you the present. I'm going to go backwards, okay? I'm going to show you from present to the recent history how Russia has always been part of the Belt and Road Initiative's plans. Now, Russia is not an official member of the Belt and Road Initiative. Russia has its own trade integration plan called the Eurasian Economic Union, which includes several Central Asian and Eastern European neighbors and countries. So Russia is not an official member, an official signatory of the BRI, but Russia is very close to the BRI and has very similar plans for global integration and trade, interconnectivity. And so I'm going to show you why all of the media reports that you see, if you have heard in recent years, the narrative around the Belt and Road Initiative and Russia, it's been that there may be problems, there may be conflicts, there may be clashing between China and Russia over their attempts to expand their sphere of influence economically, that their plans to expand trade may run into each other, like literally as if they are two runaway trains headed toward a crash. Nothing could be further from the truth. There was always alignment. There was always pronounced alignment between the two. And I want to just show you a couple of articles from an important source. I think everyone should read this source, okay? It is the briefing. Actually, I want to let me pull up a different one here. That's I'm gonna show you that one, but this is the one I want to show you. So this is from Denzin Shear and Associates. So it's a Hong Kong-based investment law firm that has a pretty big presence all across Asia. And this is the Russia briefing. So it has pretty robust ties with essentially all the countries of Asia, including Russia. And Chris Devonshire Ellis, who is one of the major stakeholders in this, Denzin Shear and Associates, they write good pieces on the information we need to know about the Belt and Road Initiative, around trade integration, China's role in it, Russia's role in it. So in April of this year, they wrote, China's Russia Belt and Road Initiative continues apace in Russia's Far East. So Khabarovsk's BRI investments reached $1.6 billion in 2022, with China trade up 31%. So Western BRI analysts have often stated that China's BRI investments into Russia have effectively stalled following the Ukraine conflict. However, they miss bilateral subtleties. In fact, China's investment into Khabarovsk's Krai province in Russia's Far East reached $1.6 billion in 2022, said regional governor Mikhail Dergarav. Dergarav said 26 new investment projects worth 133 billion rubles were launched in the area in 2022, including large-scale infrastructure projects meant to help build the Pacific Railroad. This project is comparable to the historic construction of the Baikal-Amur mainline railway. It's the first private railroad in Russia to have a length of 500 kilometers. In a short time, we have built 100 kilometers. The Russian Pacific Railway, also known as a Northern Latitudinal Railway, is a project designed to expand capacity along the existing Vladivostok eastern terminus of the Trans-Siberian Railway and then head north and further into the Russian Arctic. It is being designed with an annual capacity of 23.9 million tons of cargo and will shorten route deposits in northern parts of Western Siberia to Russian ports in the eastern seaboard and ensure development of Arctic and Russian Pacific seaboard. So here's the map here, what we're talking about. Far East. The immediate precedence has become an upgrading of Trans-Siberian rail capacity towards the east and trade with China in East Asia. Western analysts often get Chinese BRI investment data into Russia wrong because of a combination of a lack of ground research, geopolitical misunderstandings of the China-Russia dynamic, and, of course, biased geopolitical perspectives. In fact, China has been investing in Russia and continues to do so. Often this goes under the radar and isn't mentioned as BRI due to political considerations. Having Chinese investments entering Russia hasn't always been the way in which Russia wishes to promote such investments. However, that doesn't mean they don't exist. Among these more opaque investments into Russia's Khabarovsk last year include a mining and processing plant in Kutian gold deposit in Tergoro-Chumakansky, and a tin ore mine and processing plant in Solnachnaya, while a copper and tinning producing plant in Solnichi district is also nearing completion. Chinese investors have also begun developing the copper deposit called Militsky. So there you have it. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. This is Russian-China development. It is Belt and Road development because China considers these investments to be Belt and Road, even if Russia is not a formal member of the Belt and Road Initiative. So there's always been synergy. There are projects underway. And so Putin's attendance at this BRI forum is a lot more than just a diplomatic message and a political message, which it is. It's a statement. It is saying that I have security and I know I am secure in China. I know which is my closest friend, which is my most important friend, and that's China. And I don't have to worry about going to China because China is not going to listen to the diktats of a U.S. and Western bank institution like the ICC, one that is fraudulent, mind you, and does not actually live up to its name. But that's not all, because that's just a tip of the iceberg, but this is going to ramp up. China is planning to ramp up Belt and Road Initiative investments. This is from August 28th. Moscow and Beijing discuss attracting China's SOEs into Russian infrastructure projects. The Russian Ministry of Economic Development has stated that Russia and China are interested in attracting investors into Russian domestic infrastructure projects, localized production, and oil refining. China hosted a meeting at the ministerial level, Russia-Chinese permanent working group on inter-regional and cross-border cooperation in special economic zones last week. So this was written at the end of August. So this was the third week of August. The Russian delegation was headed by Deputy Minister of Economic Development, Dmitry Volvak, while the Chinese side was represented by Deputy Minister of Commerce Lin Ji. The group was originally established in 2021 of January. At last week's meeting, the Russian side discussed Chinese involvement to help implement investment projects in Russian transport infrastructure, construction, deep processing of oil, gas, tourism, food industry, fishing industry, solid waste management, as well as localization of production in Russia. They said in a statement, the Ministry of Economic Development said in a statement. Russian and Chinese companies have already been jointly active in various projects, the flagship being the Moscow-Kazan high-speed railway, which will be operational in 2024, in time for Russia to host the next BRICS summit to show off the completed railway. China's CRRC has been assisting with the track and will also provide rolling stock. Did you hear that? There will be a launch of a high-speed railway, the Moscow-Kazan railway, and it's going to be launched in time for the BRICS summit next year. So this is how deep the Belt and Road investment goes. It is not just about if you're a member or you're not a member. It is really about how to integrate trade regardless. And China is willing to do that with anybody. And Russia is its biggest and arguably its most important partner, and vice versa. So at present, right now, it takes 12 hours to make the journey from Moscow to Kazan. The high-speed rail link will reduce that to 3 hours. Kazan is Russia's fifth largest city and an important hub for China-Russia trade. So Russian banks are sanctioned by the West, making them concentrate now on domestic infrastructure projects. China is a good match given their own infrastructure build expertise. You don't say. Both want to build railway, highways, ports, and airports, which all provide cash flow returns that can be paid out as dividends. According to Volvak, Moscow is now discussing with China joint projects in the development of alternative energy sources, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, digital, and bioeconomy at the same time. Russia, what the hell? Russia is interested in Chinese investments in transport infrastructure and the development of cross-border communication and power lines in the area. So they're ramping it up, everybody. So I don't need to continue there. That's the proof. That's the proof in the pudding that this Russia is not excluded from this. And this now, I'm just going to show you quickly why Russia, first off, would want to attend such a forum, the Belt and Road Initiative Forum. Why this forum? Why not just go for an official visit? Well, the Belt and Road Initiative is quite successful even amid this really difficult economic time from the world. Most of the world is experiencing slow growth, negative growth, but BRI economies, trade is booming. 7.4% from January to July, an increase in trade volume between BRI economies, faster than overall trade growth as a whole. So in the first 7 months of this year, China's trade with countries along the proposed Belt and Road Initiative reached 8.6 trillion RMB or 1.12 trillion US dollars, up 7.4% year on year, said the General Administration on Customs. So it's, as its 10th anniversary comes up in October, you are having trade with BRI countries growing faster than overall trade, which only raised 0.4%. So BRI is lucrative. It is a fast-moving, well-oiled machinery of development. And that is why Russia would want to join. And not only this, but China and Russia have a pretty good track record of escalating and increasing trade amongst each other and between each other to their own benefit. So China and Russia are on pace to exceed their goal of 200 billion US dollars of trade volume. And the trade this year alone, in the first 6-7 months from January to July, has surged 36.5% despite a global economic downturn. The data shows the two nations' cooperation in trade has reached beyond commodities to a full-scale industrial chain, noting that deep integration and cooperation will further unleash the trade potential between the two neighbors. So exports from China to Russia served 73.4%. And meanwhile, imports of Russian goods and services also increased substantially at 15.1%. So year on year, looking from a different perspective, the growth has slowed slightly in the first 6 months of the year. China's trade surged by 40.6% year on year, customs data showed. So there's massive growth, okay? Massive growth between these two countries. Cooperation is now extended beyond traditional areas such as commodity trade and is evolving faster into a wide-scale industrial chain cooperation that can withstand headwinds. So this is an unprecedented level of growth, all right? Unprecedented level, even if it might not match the last 6 months, even if there's some slowdown because of the world economic slowdown, it is massive growth. So that alone demonstrates why Putin would want to go. It does send a political message that Putin knows who his best friends are, who his good friends are, who his fraternal friends are, allies are. China is the biggest. Now, the narrative, right? You could say, one could argue, well, that might be now, but there likely are still problems because what about all those mainstream media reports saying that Russia and China, despite all their friendship, have economic competition issues and that there are problems between the BRI and the Eurasian Economic Union, and Russia wants to lead the trade integration push, not China. China, vice versa, has the same feelings. Well, this negates history once again, my friends, because there has always been, and I'm going to show you, both from China and Russia's side, dating all the way back to the beginning of the Belt and Road Initiative, 2015, not necessarily the beginning, but close to the beginning. It launched in 2013, wasn't that well developed in 2015. But here you have the Global Times. This is actually first from Xinhua. Putin saying that the EAEU and Belt and Road integration will bring enormous opportunities, meaning the Belt and Road Initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union, they're not apart, they're not separate, they're not in competition with each other, but that there are enormous opportunities to work together. Russia and China's joint efforts to integrate the Eurasian Economic Union framework and the Silk Road Economic Belt Initiative, mind you, it was once called the New Silk Road, and then it became the One Belt, One Road, and now it's mainly called the Belt and Road Initiative for short, will create development opportunities for both sides in the region, said Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. This was in 2015, in June. The Russian president made remarks when answering a question raised by Xinhua President Kai Ming-ju at a meeting of the chiefs of the world leading news agencies on the sidelines of the 19th St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Chinese President Xi Jinping brought the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013 as a bid to increase cooperation and advance the development of countries along the Silk Road ancient route. The EAEU, which groups Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Russia, Kyrgyzstan, having also signed the agreement, is a union dedicated to regional economic integration. Dovetailing the Belt and Road Initiative in the EAU's development strategy bears immense significance to Russia and China, which will help strengthen bilateral cooperation, advanced technologies, transportation infrastructure. Putin said, so Putin himself said, no, we are not in opposition and competition, that these two are going to be synergized, that they will be able to be collaborative and integrated. So this is all the way back in 2015 that Putin was saying this. Now, in 2018, okay, Xi Jinping had this to say: One Belt, One Road in the EAEU synergy is going to boost the region's development. And in 2018 of May, the EAEU signed an agreement on trade and economic cooperation. So there you have it. The synergy of China's One Belt and One Road initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union will give impetus for economic integration in the region and facilitate its sustainable development at the same forum, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, back in 2019. We have agreed on linking the Belt and Road Initiative with the concept of the Greater Eurasian Partnership put forward by Russian President Vladimir Putin. They can quite supplement each other, which I am deeply convinced of, and will give a strong impetus for regional integration in the interest of general sustainable development. On May 17, 2018, the EAEU and China signed an agreement on trade and economic cooperation. The deal is aimed at creating conditions for improving mutual trade between the EAEU members and China. However, it does not stipulate canceling duties or automatically lowering non-tariff barriers. So the important thing here is that not only is Putin going to China for the Belt and Road Forum, but that it has deep meaning. It has a political message, a strong political message. The message being that the Russian president and Russia as a whole knows who are its friends, right? They know that China can be trusted to uphold what is quickly becoming a multipolar world, to uphold the notion that the ICC as a institution that's hijacked, completely controlled by US foreign policy diktats, that China will not recognize this institution if it is going after one of its biggest allies and flagrantly ignoring international law. Because if international law was the concern, then you'd have the United States at The Hague. You would have the collective West, all of them standing at The Hague in some capacity. And you would have an acknowledgement of the realities of this proxy war, which China has acknowledged from the very beginning. So that's the political statement, that Russia knows that China can be trusted. But the Belt and Road Forum is an incredibly important event in its own right. You have major infrastructure development projects like the Moscow-Kazan high-speed railway as part of Russia's participation bilaterally in Belt and Road investment, even as it is leading its own integration project. And you have these two projects ever so synergized. You have these two projects working together. You have China and Russia working together. And of course, this fits within the global context of a multipolar world where Russia and China are leading the way in integrating Asia, Europe, Africa, Latin America together against the citadels of empire, the citadel of empire of the United States and its willful vassals. That these countries, China and Russia, can bring economies together and help raise the development level, the standards of living of all people, particularly in the global south, is really what is at heart, or what is at the heart of this BRI forum, what is at the heart of the Belt and Road Initiative, what is at the heart of the Russia-China partnership. You hear Pepe Escobar talking about it all the time. He can go over the international north-south trade corridor. He can go over all of these pipelines, all of this infrastructure being developed, and all of it leads back to China's One Belt, One Road, Belt and Road Initiative, and Russia's own role in de-dollarization, regional integration, as Russia begins to develop into and stand up as a sovereign, dignified, independent player on the world stage. It is not where China is economically, no, but politically now occupies a role that has really propelled, I think, Russia's economy to a place, I think, much more important than its size portends, truly. But China is the center. China is the engine. China is the true leader. Even if it's not leading in a hegemonic way, it is leading by example. And it's also leading in the ways in which it cooperates with countries like Russia. So these two countries are the future. This meeting is huge because it is saying, you, collective West, you, the United States, do not call the shots anymore. Your rules will not be followed in a multipolar world unless you agree to make those rules with us together. Because, mind you, all of the moves of Russia, China, these integration projects, none of them preclude participation of the United States and the collective West. It is the collective West that has taken themselves out of it. You heard Russia, the Russian side during the BRICS summit say, Western countries won't be invited to this. But it's not because Western countries couldn't have been a part of it. It's because the way the collective West has behaved toward BRICS members, China, Russia. Russia, especially with the Ukraine war, especially with the sanctions, that is unacceptable. That is against and antithetical to the BRICS. So if the United States and the collective West want to end sanctions, they want to pull back on the unilateral military aggression, if they want to stop the attacks, propaganda attacks, all of this covert psyops, proxy wars, if they want to stop all of this madness, if they want to stop these dangerous war maneuvers, then surely they can be invited to work together with the global south and the multipolar world to make the future better for all of us, to make sure we all have a brighter future. But of course, we live in the real world. And the real world says, and the real world tells us that the United States and the collective West don't want to be part of these infrastructure projects. They want to destroy them. And so that is why Putin and Xi Jinping, and that's why Russia and China are getting more and more close. They're synergized in their values and their principles at very key levels, especially when it comes to trade integration and respect for sovereignty and win-win cooperation. They both think alike in that way. They don't have the same governments. They don't have the same systems. People get caught up. Russia's capitalist, China's socialist. In respect to these key international economic and political principles, Russia and China are synergized. And that's why the Belt and Road Initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union were always synergized from the beginning. And that is why Western mainstream media reports have always been misleading. They've always been trying to sow a wedge between China and Russia. They've been trying to play out this fantasy that has long been abandoned now of trying to split Russia away from China and vice versa. That strategy, while you may still hear mumblings and rumblings over it, and maybe certain sectors of the elite will say, oh, well, we need to do it that way. It's not going to work because there is acknowledgement, there is an understanding among even the most crass and idiotic and pathetically desperate warmongers at the top of the U.S. foreign policy establishment that it's just not going to happen. So the Belt and Road Initiative, the EAEU, Russia, China, these are the forces propelling and leading the charge for a multipolar world and for one that is economically prosperous, one that will build a better future for the masses of people worldwide, which have been stolen from, plundered. We're talking about Gabon, we're talking about Niger, we're talking about African countries living in desperate poverty because of the legacies of colonialism and the continued imposition of Western plunder and U.S.-backed plunder, the continuous consequences of U.S. militarism around the world. This is the root of the problem that the Belt and Road Initiative, Russia's integration projects seek to resolve in ways that are possible without having to engage in out-and-out confrontation. That is what makes Putin's visit coming up in October so important. It's not just about sticking it in the eyes of the collective West, even though that's what it is. This is not untrue, but it really, truly is about the future and how Russia and China are at the head of it. It gives hope to the global south. It gives hope to the global majority. And it should give hope to all of us that the sun is setting on the US-led empire and the neocons and the chicken war hawks and the rabid profiteers that want to take everything and strip every bit of wealth and human rights away from the people. This is what Russia and China are fighting. And this is why Putin is going to make his first visit since the arrest warrant by the ICC to China, because this is the world they're going to build, regardless of whatever the United States, the ICC, you name the unilateralist-led institution, you name it, Russia and China will stand together no matter what they throw at them. And that is fact. All right, everybody, that's the content. Wow, we have been on for 2.5 hours today. All right, I'm seeing people give me audio advice. I hope my audio was okay. I think there's more echo in my apartment too because we haven't been able to put all the stuff exactly where it went before. As you can see, no books on the bookshelf or some books, and that's only because, but it's because we haven't put the screws back in the bottom of the shelf. All right, so people said the audio was fine. I was trying not to speak too loud, but I do have to get a little close because I'm too far. Then I sound, I think, a little far away. All right, everybody. Here we go. I'm going to shout out people now, all right? But I want to ask, all right? So a couple of things. So first, the plugs, all right? So if you're watching this program, you appreciate it. Of course, hit that like button. Of course, subscribe to the channel. Of course, hit that notifications bell. But the best way to support, if you can, is financially. And that's because I am going to Vietnam in October. I am doing more traveling in order to bring you more direct journalism from the places. I did that while I was in China. I do hope one day to go to Russia, although I can't say these drone strikes are not concerning, to say the least. But I do hope one day to go to Russia to report from there. I do hope to travel more, but also I need to upgrade technology, and I need also to be able to make this program sustainable so that I can spend more time working on those kinds of projects. So with that said, please become a supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. There are yearly memberships, monthly memberships where you can give any amount monthly. And there you get certain perks like suggesting guests, asking questions of guests, suggesting content. You also get audio periodically when I'm able to get audio up exclusively to Patreon as podcast format. You can also, get early notifications. And also I just post fun things on there to interact with the community. So that's the best place. Substack has a very similar vibe, but the biggest perk there is comments, suggesting content, that kind of thing. I give now announcements, notifications. You can get access to my archives if you're a paid member. So my articles that I've written there. And there's Buy Me a Coffee, which I've just recently developed. I recently started. So you can go there for one-time options. There's a membership option. YouTube membership is great for $4.99 per month. You get shout outs here. You can do very similar things, suggest content, usually in community posts in the comments section. You can ask questions, that kind of thing. And there are also other one-time options, PayPal. I think my Venmo and Cashapp are also in the video description. So, so if you appreciate this work and you want to see it continue and expand, because I'm not looking to become like a full throttle, some kind of like mogul. I'm not going to have a media empire here. That's not really the goal. But the goal is to get this content out to you in more effective ways, in more creative ways, to be able to pay people who volunteer to help out this program to make it more technologically and aesthetically pleasant and user-friendly. All of that takes money. And so I really appreciate all of you on this last day of August. It's the end of the month. It's not a great time for money usually, but I really appreciate all of you and all of your support. Truly, I am very close. I want to check, actually. I'm going to get the shout out soon. I just want to check the number of subscribers I have. So I am now at 92,000, about 600. So I am under 7,400 now. 7397, 7,397 subscribers away from 100,000. That's a huge milestone for me, because mind you, just a year or two ago, year and a half ago, before the Ukraine conflict started, I was not as active on here. I could only stream once a month. I was writing more articles. I was working full-time plus. And so it was hard to get on stream frequently Now I'm doing this part-time and working part-time, so I have more time to engage in this kind of work. And so your support has been so incredibly generous. So thank you so much to everybody, people who just engage in the chat, share, subscribe for free, all the good free options, and everyone, of course, that supports financially in all the ways that you can. Amazing, incredible. You all are the people's champs. Seriously. All right, everybody. So I'm going to give some announcements first. Announcements. I almost forgot. I am all over the place. Today, I felt like I was a little off of my game, to be honest. It's been quite a few crazy several days. I was sleeping in my wife's parents' place for like 3 nights because there was work going on here. They were late to start the work. The ceiling was having these cracks. Luckily, it wasn't as serious as we thought it was because the cracks were getting bigger and bigger. It was just a sheetrock problem. But they started the work late. We were out 3 nights. I had terrible internet where I was, and I was just dealing with what was going on there at this apartment. Being in a different neighborhood and all this nonsense. So, and trying to still work my part-time job with bad internet. It was kind of a hot mess for a couple of days. So I'm a little off my game, to be honest. But so I want to give you some announcements of what's to come here. It's Labor Day weekend, so no stream throughout the weekend. Probably not until early to mid next week. I definitely am having Carlos Martinez and Dr. Ken Hammond on the show to talk all things China and geopolitics because there's a lot to cover, really and truly. And Carlos Martinez, of course, is a really good friend of mine. We're going to have an afternoon stream also with Ken Hammond, who is a wealth of knowledge historically around China. We're going to get pretty deep into that on Wednesday, probably about 1 o'clock Eastern time. And you'll want to catch that. They're great. And I'm trying to reschedule. I have to get to that actually. Reschedule with Margaret, Kimberly, and Gerald Horn. I want to definitely focus on Africa with them. That is definitely coming around the bend in September. I just have to get the dates and everything settled. They are a wealth of knowledge on Africa, foreign policy when it comes to Africa. And somebody saying that Gabon coup is very fishy. Yes, I have sources coming out of Niger, actually, that are a little more suspicious of this coup than maybe the others. But look, politics on the African continent, especially in Central Africa, are very complex. So I'm taking a wait-and-see approach there because we can report on it, and certainly there are some definite anti-French sentiment and elements there, and there are people who are very enthusiastic about it. But I want to wait and see. I want to do more investigation. I want others also to there are more Africa-focused folks, and having Gerald Horn on here, who's always a wealth of knowledge and can provide the historical context, and Margaret Kimberly, who's always keeping her ear to the ground on the African continent. That would be a great conversation. So I'll probably be more mid-September. Brian Berletic will be back on probably the mid-September as well. I'm going to be on his program. I believe it's September 8th. And, and then after that, I have some other ideas, but they're still kind of ideas. And so, yeah, it should be a great month of September. In October, mid-October, I'm probably going to be doing a lot of very intense coverage for the first couple of weeks of October because you're not going to see me for a couple of weeks live, probably, unless I can go live in Vietnam. But I'll be in Vietnam for 2.5 weeks from October 14th, although I have to leave October 12th. Don't get me started. Starting October 12th when I have to leave, I won't be back until the 29th of October. I will be in Vietnam for a delegation with Veterans for Peace. It's very special for me because I do have Vietnamese heritage on my mother's side. My Twitter handle, Spirit of Ho, Ho Chi Minh. Vietnam's struggle, resistance against the United States has always been inspirational to me, or has been inspirational for me ever since I started to follow politics and history and geopolitics and whatnot. So it's a very important visit for me to see the country, to meet people. Also, some of these contacts with Vets for Peace have been communicating with me in Vietnam, who are there. Been communicating with me since, gosh, 2014, 15, when I started to really write about empire and, you know, geopolitics and that sort of thing, and have been encouraging me to come and to come and to come, and it never really worked. And so this year it's going to work. And I'm very excited, and I'm definitely going to go. I got to hit up Luna Oi, of course. It's been too long. I also have to, I'm going to meet with, so one of the great things about speaking at the United Nations Security Council is that it did reach many people. You know, I have German media wanting to speak to me. You might know them, Activism Munich. Great channel. I'm going to try to interview with them this month. But also, I just received a message from someone at Vietnam's mission to the United Nations. I'm going to meet with him. And I am hoping also just to develop more connections, and so I can do some talks, because you have Biden visiting in September to Vietnam, and you have this history and legacy, especially of late, where you have this tension where the United States is trying to move Vietnam in an anti-China direction, while China and Vietnam are building more and more robust economic ties. And then you also have the fact that Vietnam is a fast-growing economy. So I want to bring you coverage about Vietnam, especially modern Vietnam, that you don't get, especially in the context of Ukraine and all the things I talk about. So it should be a wonderful trip, a great trip. It's a very expensive trip, though. So if you're wondering why, Danny, why do you ask for money? Well, this trip is, my wife is also coming, and she's a separate delegate. So let's just say we're paying for two, and you know, flights are not so bad, but everything I have to, you know, it's a mandatory donation to the organization, which I'm happy to give. But everything else also is costly. This is a new era in the world economy where everything costs a lot. So that's why I'm raising funds as well, because this trip is important, but it's also, you know, it's going to put me out a good sum. This is less of a delegation where you're like, you know, where you're supported. It's more of a one where you're being the supporter, you know, because it's a lot of Agent Orange work. So if you want to help me help that kind of work, please do support this channel. Patreon is great. The first foremost is annual options, monthly options for whatever amount. Substack, of course, people like Substack. Good interface, user friendly. I think the fees are a little better. Annual options there as well. YouTube has a monthly option. One-time options include Buy Me a Coffee, Cashapp, and PayPal. I tend to like Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal the best. All right, everybody. So that's it for the announcements, I think. There'll be more to come, I'm sure, in the future. But you'll see me on stream mid next week. That's what I'm hoping for, at least. So, okay. Let me get to some announcement. What am I saying? Let me get to some shout outs. All right. So first, the super chats, and also a new member. We have new member, Intermediary Fossil. Salute to you. All right. Nunya Business. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Nunya Business. You're welcome. You're welcome. Intermediary Fossil also gave a generous $20 super chat. I believe that is. It doesn't say sticker, so I believe that's a chat. So thank you so much. Rodolfo Placarte, thank you so much for your $3 super sticker. Conan, thanks for your $5 super sticker. Saltor, thanks you for your 1,000 yen, I believe that is. Thank you so much. Chuck, oh gosh, Sizklak, probably butchered that name, but your super sticker is appreciated nonetheless. And then we have Steven Rosick. Thank you so much for your super sticker. I'm going to try to see if there are any members. Any members, Patreon members, give a shout out. Yeah, no, if you have. All right, one last announcement. Telegram. That's a great free way to support me. T.me/Danny Haiphong. You can find that. And I got to shout out Rockfin folks too. You can find T.me/Danny Haiphong. You can find that in the link tree in the channel banner or in the video description. Subscribe on Telegram. There's still 1,100 people here. If you 1,100 people hear me, download Telegram if you don't have it. If you do have Telegram, find my China and Geopolitics channel, T.me/Danny Haiphong. Video description has a link tree, which is the place where you can find it, subscribe, and you can use the chat feature, and we can communicate through the chat feature. Because I am also looking for if people are in Vietnam, if people have contacts that they think I should reach out to, you can reach me there. Of course, you can reach me on all my pay platforms, and you can also find me on social media, on Twitter, etc. Spirit of Ho. I'm not so inaccessible, although there are some boundaries to people's ability to get in touch with me, but please do get in touch, because I do want to make Vietnam, because I do see John Mann said there's a great Vietnam YouTube channel, Primitive Skills, which I am definitely down to check out, because I wanna meet up with folks. Well, Primitive Skills seems like it's a building channel, but I do want to meet up with people who are who would be interested in talking to me, and also anyone, but anyway, that's just for Vietnam. But even just in general, I'm always open to suggestions, and while I can't always answer all things, I do try to be attentive to what people are thinking who follow my work. All right, everyone, I'm just going through the chat right now to see if there's anything notable. I thought, isn't it wonderful? Oh, someone said do some push-ups. How rude. I can do push-ups. I'm not going to do them on here for you, though. I thought, isn't it wonderful? Say, that's very nice of you. When I'm stable, you're on my list of donations. Thank you so much. I know a lot of people just do not have the stability economically, so I understand that. Definitely. Okay, everybody. I think I gotta wrap it up. It's late here. Somebody's called me a kinder, gentler Carl Za. I don't know. Carl's pretty nice, man. Pretty nice. But I would like to think that my content, Carl has his own kind of content, and mine is a little different, but we work together. We're friends. I mean, he's been on this show several times. Definitely. And we'll be on it again for sure. Actually, he was just on the panel that I had on here that didn't get as much views as I would like it. I really wish that one got peddled more. The algorithm didn't like it. People didn't attend. It was my least attended live stream in several months. But it was a different thing. It was a different kind of project. It kind of deviated from what I usually do, which I do sometimes. Try to get creative here. All right, everybody. It looks like that's all for shout-outs. I don't see many members in the chat either. I do want to thank all the moderators who were here. I know Desert Santis was here. Where also is here. So thanks so much. Take good care. No, you were not. Isn't it wonderful? You were not rude. I hope not, at least in the chat. Someone asked me about Xiang Yu. Yeah, Xiang Yu is a friend of the show. But yeah, no, we'll all be convening. All right. Take good care, everybody. Good night. Have a good one. And I'll see you again on the next stream. Probably next week. Have a good, if you're, got the day off, if you're working hard, got the day off. If you don't, cheers to a new week. If you're out in one of these hot zones, try to stay cool. I know I'm in big trouble with that because my air conditioner broke in my bedroom, but Arlene says she's a Patreon member, or Arlene says you're a Patreon member. Shout out to Arlene. Shout you out, Patreon members. Tabar2K says they're a patron member. Have a good trip to Vietnam. Shout out to you. Good night. Shout out to all the Patreon members who are shouting themselves out. I know it's tough for me to do that. Thanks for a great show. Desert Mantis also on Patreon and a moderator. He's truly very a hero of this channel. All of you in your own way. Take good care, everyone. Love your support. See you again soon. Bye-bye.